Hello, everyone, and welcome to the place where shadows whisper and nightmares softly breathe. So close your eyes, take a slow breath. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where you from and what time are you watching? Let's get comfortable and relax.
In a small, forgotten town, nestled between dense forests and shadowy hills, I lived a life that seemed ordinary, yet was tainted by an ever-looming darkness. It was always odd, this town. It had a peculiar charm that masked an undercurrent of dread. The streets were narrow, flanked by old, decaying houses that whispered secrets only the wind could understand. As a child, I played in those streets, but every fleeting moment of laughter was tainted by an unshakable feeling that something was watching. I remembered one particular evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters. It was the first night I encountered what would forever haunt my dreams. I was drawn to the woods by an inexplicable force, a thrill coiling in my gut as I stepped beyond the familiar borders of my reality. The trees loomed tall, twisted, their gnarled branches scraping against the sky. How I felt so alive amidst that silence. Yet, there was an unsettling sensation that prickled at my skin, a feeling akin to being the prey in a hunter's gaze. I pressed ahead, curiosity mingling with dread. Deep within the woods, I stumbled upon a clearing, a circular patch of ground where no vegetation grew. In its center stood an ancient well, its stones slick with moss, dark water swirling below. I peered into its abyss, feeling an inexplicable pull, as if the water called my name. I leaned forward, catching a glimpse of my reflection mingling with shadows that flickered just beneath the surface. That's when I heard it, soft whispers weaving through the air like strands of silk, beckoning me closer. I stumbled back, heart racing, but curiosity nagged at me like an insistent ghost. I didn't realize then that some doors, once opened, are not meant to be shut. That night, I returned home, the air electric with a strange unease. Over the next few weeks, the whispers came more frequently, calling out at dusk when shadows grew longer and the air thickened with mystery. Each night, I found myself drawn back to that well, entranced by the haunting allure of the unknown. The whispers began to take shape, revealing words that tugged at the edges of my sanity. "Come closer, we know you, we see you." I tried to dismiss them, but they clawed at my mind like a relentless tide. I spoke of my findings to friends, but they laughed it off, brushing me aside as a foolish child with a wild imagination. Yet, deep within me, I could feel their skepticism causing a rift between us. As the weeks dragged on, I grew more isolated, retreating into myself and the darkness that surrounded me during those twilight hours. The well began to feel like an old friend, its whispers now comforting rather than terrifying. I soon found solace in the shadows, often losing track of time as I lingered there, mesmerized by the flickering surface of the water. Then, one fateful night, the air grew thick with an unsettling energy, an electric tension crackling around me as I approached the well. The whispers had morphed into a cacophony, an indescribable chorus that sent shivers down my spine. I felt drawn in, the voices urging me to lean closer, to finally understand. It was then that I saw her, a figure materializing from the depths, her face pale and twisted, eyes like swirling voids of despair. She beckoned me with a skeletal hand, mouth moving, but no words escaped. Fear gripped my heart as I stumbled back, realizing the price of my curiosity. The whispers grew louder, filling the air with urgency. I turned to run, but it was as if the woods themselves conspired to hold me captive. Each step became heavier, the shadows stretching and morphing, thick tendrils wrapping around my ankles, pulling me closer to the well. I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips, drowning in the symphony of chaos around me. The figure loomed ever closer, a terrifying smile slowly unveiling her twisted intentions. I fought with all my might to escape, pulling through the nightmare that threatened to consume me. Finally, I broke free, sprinting back to the safety of my home, heart pounding, lungs burning. I collapsed at my doorstep, gasping for breath, the last echoes of those sinister whispers fading into the night. But the darkness didn't recede. It settled around me like a fog, and I knew then that I was marked by something beyond my understanding. Days turned into weeks, and although I stayed away from the woods, the chill of that night never left me. Shadows began to crawl across my walls, the whispers haunting my thoughts even in waking moments. Friends grew distant, uneasy with my sudden change, my inability to shake off the tendrils of fear that clung to me. One by one, they drifted away, leaving me alone with the echoes of what I had awakened. I thought perhaps if I ignored the well, if I pretended it was nothing but a figment of my imagination, it would go away. But one night, a storm howled outside, rattling the very foundation of my home. Rain fell in torrents, and as I hid beneath my covers, the whispers returned, more insistent than ever. They slithered through the cracks of my mind, urging me to return, to confront what I had unleashed. Consumed with a mixture of terror and defiance, I gathered what remained of my courage and ventured back into the stormy night. The woods were alive, shadows writhing and dancing, yet I pressed on, driven by a force greater than fear. Reaching the well, I felt the whispers wrap around me, pulling me down into the darkness. The air grew thick and suffocating as I leaned over the edge. The figure emerged once again, more defined, her grin widening as despair radiated from her hollow being. I felt her icy fingers touch my forehead, and I gasped, visions flooding through me. Lost souls trapped between realms, their cries an unending echo. I realized then that the well was not merely a portal. It was a prison, a collector of all the lost and forsaken. Panic rose within me as I fought against the pull. I stumbled back, desperate to escape, and in that moment of clarity, I understood. The only way to break free was to sever the connection forged by my curiosity. I screamed my defiance into the night, feeling the energy shift as I turned and fled, racing through the trees until the whispers faded into silence. The well remained behind, a dark sentinel standing vigil over those it had ensnared. Days turned into months, and while I tried to reclaim my life, the experience left scars on my soul. The town became quieter, my laughter replaced by a solemn understanding of the darkness that lurked just beneath the veil of normalcy. It was a lesson etched deeply within me. Some truths are better left unfound, for curiosity can awaken horrors far beyond our comprehension. To this day, I avoid that part of the woods, the whispers still echoing in my dreams, a reminder that the shadows will forever linger in corners we dare not tread. The veil of innocence has been lifted, and I now walk a path intertwined with the knowledge that, in the presence of darkness, curiosity is a dangerous, often fatal, companion. I still remember the night everything changed. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, just me and my thoughts. I lived alone in a secluded cabin nestled deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest town. I loved the solitude, the way the trees swayed gently in the wind, casting eerie shadows under the moonlight. It was peaceful, most of the time. That night, however, an unsettling feeling crept over me like a chill. I brushed it off, attributing it to fatigue. I settled into my worn armchair, a cup of herbal tea steaming in my hands, and opened a book I'd meant to finish weeks ago. The clock ticked rhythmically as I flipped through pages, trying to immerse myself in the story, but unease clawed at me from the corners of my mind. It started with a subtle whisper, a sound so faint I almost mistook it for the wind. I strained to listen, setting my book aside as I peered into the shadows beyond the flickering candlelight. The whisper came again, more pronounced this time. It was a voice, a soft, melodic tone that sent shivers down my spine. "Help me," it called out, echoing through the stillness of the night. My heart raced in my chest, and I shifted in my chair, half expecting to see someone standing there, living and breathing, but around me was nothing but silence in the dark embrace of the forest. I rationalized it as a trick of my imagination. Perhaps it was the remnants of a dream, or maybe I was just too isolated from civilization. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the chill of fear. I poured myself more tea, hoping to drown out the haunting whispering in my thoughts. I turned the radio on, but the static only heightened my anxiety. Time dragged on. The soothing sounds of the cabin settled around me once again. Then, just as I began to relax, I heard it again, clearer this time, more urgent. "Help me." It wasn't just a voice, it was a cry filled with desperation. The air felt thick with dread, and I rose from my chair, compelled to investigate the source of the disturbance. I stepped toward the door, hesitant yet drawn by an unseen force. My heart thudded loudly in my ears as I creaked open the heavy door. The cool night air hit me, a stark contrast to the warmth of the cabin. I stepped outside, my breath visible in the crisp night. The trees loomed ominously, swaying gently as if they were alive, whispering secrets to one another. My skin prickled with an unsettling awareness. I felt as if I was being watched. I called out into the darkness, my voice trembling. Is anyone there? The only response was the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. An eerie silence enveloped me, swallowing my courage whole. The night deepened, shrouding the forest in a blanket of shadows. Suddenly, from the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement, something darting between the trees. Adrenaline surged through my veins, and I was suddenly hyper-aware of the danger around me. I took a step forward, my senses sharp, mind racing. Who's there? I shouted, my voice shaky but firm. It was then that I felt it, a chilling breeze that froze me in place. The atmosphere shifted. There was something wrong. The whisper returned, more distinct. Help me. It seemed to come from beyond the trees, deeper in the woods. I faltered, caught between fear and curiosity. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I took a step into the forest. Darkness enveloped me. The trees stood like watchful giants, keeping their secrets tucked behind their gnarled trunks. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and it felt like the very essence of the forest was alive around me. I stumbled through the underbrush, branches clawing at my skin as I pressed onward. Help me, it echoed out into the void, pleading and desperate. I followed the sound, heart racing, breath quickening, when suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way, and I fell. The world spun as I tumbled into an abyss, hitting the damp earth below. Dazed and confused, I struggled to regain my bearings, the whispering now a cacophony around me. I found myself in a small clearing, moonlight filtering through the thick canopy above. And there, in the center of it all, was a figure, faintly illuminated as if the shadows themselves were afraid to approach. It was a girl, pale and ethereal, her hair long and tangled, eyes wide with an expression of terror. Help me, she begged, reaching out a trembling hand. Fear gripped me, yet something drew me toward her. I felt the weight of her anguish, a palpable energy swirling around us. What happened? How can I help you? I whispered, inching closer. But the moment I stepped forward, her expression shifted, horror replaced hope as she screamed. Run. Don't stay. My heart plummeted as the ground began to tremble, the trees around the clearing shifting menacingly. I turned to flee, panic coursing through me, but the shadows closed in like a shroud, suffocating. I felt icy fingers brush against my skin, dragging me back toward darkness. I sprinted, adrenaline fueling my escape as the whispers morphed into screams, echoing in my mind as I burst through the trees and stumbled back toward my cabin. The door slammed shut behind me, and I locked it, chest heaving, mind racing. I could still hear her, the girl and her cries, but now they were inside my head. I collapsed onto the floor as the shadows danced outside my windows, warping into twisted figures mocking my terror. I stumbled through the night, clutching my tea as if it could ward off the horrors lurking beyond. Hours passed, but sleep eluded me, and the whispers transformed into sinister laughter, filling the cabin with a suffocating darkness. I felt hollow, knowing something was very wrong, knowing I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The girl's face haunted me, her eyes filled with fear. I couldn't help her. I couldn't even help myself. It was only after that night that I began to understand the true nature of the forest, the secrets it kept, and the spirits that roamed within, forever bound to the shadows, whispering their pleas to anyone who dared to listen. Perhaps the worst part of it all was realizing I'd welcomed something malevolent into my life. I would never be free of that night, nor of the haunting cries that would echo in my mind forevermore. Despite its beauty, the forest was alive with dark stories, a reality that would consume me if I dared to remain. So I packed my things, and I left, never looking back, but the whispers followed me, weaving into my dreams, reminding me of that fateful night in the woods, and I knew the darkness would always find a way to haunt those who listened. It was an ordinary autumn evening when I decided to visit my grandmother's old house. After her death, I inherited the place but had been hesitant to go back, mostly because of the eerie stories that surrounded the small, creaky structure. The neighbors whispered about strange occurrences, but I brushed them off as mere superstitions. As I pulled into the driveway, the sun began to set, casting shadows that danced eerily across the front yard. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I forced myself to step out of the car, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet echoing the tension in my chest. I unlocked the door, and a cold gust of wind urged me inside, as if the house itself were beckoning me to uncover its secrets. I turned on the lights, their feeble glow revealing dusty furniture draped in white sheets, remnants of a lifelong gone. I could feel the weight of countless memories pressing upon my shoulders, but I was here to clear out the clutter and make the house livable again. As I moved from room to room, each creak of the floorboards reminded me of my childhood visits, where laughter filled the air, and my grandmother's warm smile was ever present. I paused in the living room, staring at the old portraits that hung on the wall. Their eyes seemed to follow me, filled with sorrow and perhaps a hint of warning. I shook off the unease and proceeded to the attic. The steep staircase creaked ominously beneath my weight, a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Once at the top, I was greeted by a musty scent and dim light filtering through a grimy window. Boxes were strewn about, filled with things I hadn't seen in years, old toys, clothes, and photographs. Then, tucked away in the corner, I noticed an intricately carved wooden box. It was ornate, with strange symbols engraved into its surface, symbols I didn't recognize but felt oddly drawn to. My fingers tingled as I opened the box, revealing a collection of old letters and a small, antique mirror. The mirror was tarnished and clouded, but as I gazed into it, I felt a strange compulsion to look deeper. I brushed my fingers across its surface, and suddenly the room felt colder, the air thickening around me. Shadows flickered in the corner of my vision, and I could swear I heard a whisper, faint yet persistent, urging me to uncover the truth hidden within these walls. A mix of fear and curiosity washed over me, but I pushed the dread aside, determined to piece together the remnants of my grandmother's past. I began to read the letters, which revealed a tale of loss, betrayal, and sorrow. My grandmother had written about a dark figure that haunted her dreams, a presence that grew more menacing over time. As the night deepened, the whispers became clearer, calling my name, luring me into a labyrinth of memories I had never known. I felt a chill run down my spine, but couldn't tear myself away. Each letter pulled me deeper into her anguish, but it was the last one that made my blood run cold. My grandmother had described a cursed mirror, one that trapped souls and fed on misery. The last sentence echoed in my mind. If you ever find it, do not look within. You might not return. A chilling realization swept over me. The mirror was the one I held. Panic clawed at my chest, and I felt the shadows swirling, thickening around me. I dropped the letters, desperately trying to back away, but the mirror radiated an almost magnetic pull. I could hear my own heartbeat racing as the whispers became screams, a cacophony of despair that enveloped me. In a frantic attempt to escape, I stumbled backward, knocking the mirror from my grasp. It shattered on the floor, and as the glass splintered, the shadows erupted, swirling around me, pulling me into darkness. I grasped at the air, but there was nothing to hold on to. Time twisted and warped, and I found myself standing in my grandmother's living room, but everything was different. The furniture was gone, replaced by a suffocating void, and the air was thick with an oppressive silence. I couldn't tell if I was dreaming or trapped in some nightmare from which I couldn't awaken. Just as I was about to succumb to despair, a flicker of light caught my eye. It pulsed faintly, drawing me closer. As I approached, the light beamed brighter, illuminating a reflection in another mirror that had somehow appeared. I saw not my reflection but a figure, unmistakably my grandmother, staring back at me with an expression of both fear and resolve. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but I felt the urgency behind them. I reached out, desperate to connect. The moment my fingers brushed the surface of the glass, a searing pain shot through me, and the world around me began to shatter in a brilliant explosion of light. Then, silence. I awoke on the attic floor, heart pounding, surrounded by shards of the shattered mirror. The letters were gone, and in that moment, I realized the darkness had been released. Gripped by fear, I fled the house, vowing never to return. Outside, the autumn air felt fresh, yet a lingering dread followed me. The curse of the mirror was gone, but I knew I would carry my grandmother's heartbreak with me forever, trapped between the memories and the horror of what I had uncovered. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps the darkness had not been wholly vanquished, merely waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to come and awaken it again. It was late September when I moved into the old house at the end of Maple Street. The locals said it was haunted, but I brushed off the tales as just that, stories meant to frighten children. I was keen to start a new life, and, besides, the rent was incredibly cheap. The house had a peculiar charm, with its peeling paint and creaking floors, each step echoing the history embedded in its wooden bones. I imagined the nostalgia of past tenants, their laughter and tears lingering like shadows, but I didn't expect what would soon emerge from those very shadows. The first few days passed without incident. I unpacked boxes, set up my modest furniture, and even managed to explore the small yard, discovering an overgrown garden that whispered echoes of former beauty. As night fell, the house settled into a disconcerting stillness, almost like it was holding its breath. My sleep was restless. I heard faint sounds, whispers that seemed to weave through the walls, secrets caught in the atmosphere. One night, as I lay awake, a chill crept over me. The temperature plummeted, and a flicker of movement caught my eye in the hallway. I sat up, heart racing, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. At the end of the hallway, I saw a figure, indistinct but undeniably there, shrouded in shadow. I blinked, and it vanished. I brushed it off as a figment of my imagination, a trick played by my tired mind. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself haunted not just by visions but by a growing unease. Things would go missing, only to reappear in odd places. I began to hear sounds resembling soft laughter, and sometimes I could swear I felt a presence beside me when I was alone. I tried to rationalize it, thinking perhaps it was just my overactive imagination, but deep down, I knew something was off. Sleep deprived and jittery, I decided to investigate the history of the house. My research led me to an elderly woman in town who had lived near the house for decades. She told me a story that made my blood run cold. Many years ago, a family had lived in the house, a mother and her 2 children. The mother was known to be rather eccentric, often talking to herself, wandering the streets in a trance-like state. One night, during a storm, the children went missing. A search ensued, but they were never found. The mother, distraught, was said to wander the woods at the edge of town, her voice echoing the names of her children. That night, I lay in bed, the woman's words gnawing at me. The whispers in the walls became clearer, almost desperate, calling out for help. I could no longer dismiss them as tricks of the mind. I felt compelled to delve deeper into the past of the family and the house. I spent days at the library, scanning old newspapers and records, piecing together the haunting history that draped the house like a thick fog. As I uncovered more, I learned that the mother had collapsed into madness, believing her children were still alive, hidden somewhere in the woods. I could feel her sorrow seep into my bones, a palpable grief that seemed to saturate the air around me. I began to wonder if the whispers were her voice, calling to me, beckoning for closure or perhaps a rescue. Torn between fear and compassion, I ventured into the woods on the night of the full moon, hoping to understand the source of her despair. The trees loomed above me like ancient sentinels, and the darkness was impenetrable. I felt my pulse quickening as I walked deeper into the woods, the whispers growing louder. "Help us," they chorused, echoing off the trees. I stumbled, the ground uneven beneath my feet, and then I heard it, a soft, childlike giggle followed by a cry. "Mommy!" I froze, dread washing over me as I turned in the direction of the sound. Was it possible? Could the children still be alive, trapped in the echoes of this realm? I followed the sound until I reached a small clearing, bathed in the moonlight. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The laughter faded, replaced by silence. Chills licked my spine. The air felt heavy, charged with a sorrow that enveloped me. And that's when I saw her, the figure of the mother standing at the edge of the clearing, her hair wild and face pale, eyes wide with an unsettling intensity. She pointed towards the trees, her mouth moving, but no words came out. I stepped forward, instinct overtaking my fear. "I want to help you," I shouted, but the moment the words left my lips, she vanished like a wisp of smoke, leaving behind only the echo of her sorrow. Panic seized me, and I felt the ground shift beneath me, the earth trembling. In that moment, I understood. The house was a vessel, a bridge between time, and she was trapped in a cycle of grief. I returned home, breathless and shaken, but now with clarity. I needed to free her, to give voice to her story. I spent hours writing, pouring my heart onto the pages, telling the story of a mother's love and loss, capturing the essence of her anguish, hoping to reach the remnants of her spirit still haunting my home. The house grew quieter in the following days as if it were listening, the whispers dwindling to soft sighs. I finished the story, a letter to the past, and placed it in a box in the small attic where the sunlight barely penetrated. That night, I felt a warmth envelop me, a gentle presence, and in my dream, I saw the mother once more, her face softer, as if accepting her loss. "Thank you," she whispered, and as dawn broke, I awoke feeling lighter. The old house transformed. The air was clearer, the shadows less menacing. I filled the garden with flowers, each bloom a tribute to the past that lingered in the walls. I realized that sometimes, confronting our fears brings solace, not just for ourselves, but for those lost between worlds. As I stood in my once haunted home, I felt a connection to the weight of history, a bond that, strange as it seemed, wove our lives together in a tapestry richer than fear. It was a foggy night in late October when a dense mist settled over the small town of Willow Creek, enveloping it in an eerie silence. I remember it well. I had recently moved into a century-old house that had seen better days. Its wooden floors creaked at every step, and the paint chipped off the walls like old memories trying to escape. I usually welcomed solitude, but on this particular night, I felt an unsettling sensation creeping up my spine. I was alone, with only the flickering light of a single lamp illuminating the room, casting long shadows that danced ominously across the walls. I decided to pour myself a glass of wine to calm my nerves and tuned into a classic horror podcast to embrace the eerie ambience surrounding me. As the tales unfolded, a chill snaked its way through the room, heightening my senses. Suddenly, a loud thud resonated from the attic, freezing me in my tracks. My heart raced. I tried to shake it off as an old house settling, but deep down, I knew something was off. With hesitant resolve, I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the attic door, the rusted knob cold against my palm. As I opened the door, the musty air hit me, thick with dust and a sense of foreboding. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight, each step echoing into the abyss above. I reached the top and scanned the dimly lit space with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. Cobwebs hung like ghostly drapes, and boxes filled with forgotten trinkets loomed like silent sentinels. My eyes were drawn to an old trunk in the corner, its leather cracked and worn, an inscription barely decipherable on the latch. Curiosity surged, and I approached it, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Upon opening the trunk, I found old photographs, yellowed with age, depicting a family with faces obscured by time. But what caught my attention was a small, rusted mirror tucked away at the bottom, its surface tarnished and unclear. I picked it up, brushing away the dust, and suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. As I peered into the mirror, the reflection warped and twisted, revealing not only my image but something else lurking behind me, an indistinct shadow that flickered in and out like a faulty TV signal. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there, only the suffocating silence of the attic. Dismissing it as a trick of the light, I returned to the mirror, and that's when I saw it again, clearer this time. A pale, thin figure dressed in tattered clothing, watching me with hollow, soulless eyes. The air grew thick and cold, and I stumbled back, dropping the mirror. It shattered, sending shards glinting across the floor like jagged teeth. Panic surged through me, and I dashed for the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste to escape. I burst back into the living room, shutting the attic door behind me, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I slumped against the door, breathless, my mind racing with questions. Had I truly seen what I thought I saw? I couldn't shake off the feeling that something had followed me down from the attic, lurking just beyond my vision. I turned on every light in the house, flooding every corner with brightness, hoping it would chase away the shadows that seemed to cling possessively to my surroundings. Unable to sleep, I decided to call a friend for comfort. "You won't believe what just happened," I began, recounting the incident while feeling absurdly foolish for sounding like the protagonist of a bad horror movie. My friend, with a laugh, brushed it off as an overactive imagination, but the laughter faded when I suddenly heard a soft, echoing giggle in the background, a sound so out of place and chilling that it froze the blood in my veins. It was a foggy night in late October when a dense mist settled over the small town of Willow Creek, enveloping it in an eerie silence. I remember it well. I had recently moved into a century-old house that had seen better days. Its wooden floors creaked at every step, and the paint chipped off the walls like old memories trying to escape. I usually welcomed solitude, but on this particular night, I felt an unsettling sensation creeping up my spine. I was alone, with only the flickering light of a single lamp illuminating the room, casting long shadows that danced ominously across the walls. I decided to pour myself a glass of wine to calm my nerves and tuned into a classic horror podcast to embrace the eerie ambience surrounding me. As the tales unfolded, a chill snaked its way through the room, heightening my senses. Suddenly, a loud thud resonated from the attic, freezing me in my tracks. My heart raced. I tried to shake it off as an old house settling, but deep down, I knew something was off. With hesitant resolve, I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the attic door, the rusted knob cold against my palm. As I opened the door, the musty air hit me, thick with dust and a sense of foreboding. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight, each step echoing into the abyss above. I reached the top and scanned the dimly lit space with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. Cobwebs hung like ghostly drapes, and boxes filled with forgotten trinkets loomed like silent sentinels. My eyes were drawn to an old trunk in the corner, its leather cracked and worn, an inscription barely decipherable on the latch. Curiosity surged, and I approached it, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Upon opening the trunk, I found old photographs, yellowed with age, depicting a family with faces obscured by time. But what caught my attention was a small, rusted mirror tucked away at the bottom, its surface tarnished and unclear. I picked it up, brushing away the dust, and suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. As I peered into the mirror, the reflection warped and twisted, revealing not only my image but something else lurking behind me, an indistinct shadow that flickered in and out like a faulty TV signal. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there, only the suffocating silence of the attic. Dismissing it as a trick of the light, I returned to the mirror, and that's when I saw it again, clearer this time. A pale, thin figure dressed in tattered clothing, watching me with hollow, soulless eyes. The air grew thick and cold, and I stumbled back, dropping the mirror. It shattered, sending shards glinting across the floor like jagged teeth. Panic surged through me, and I dashed for the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste to escape. I burst back into the living room, shutting the attic door behind me, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I slumped against the door, breathless, my mind racing with questions. Had I truly seen what I thought I saw? I couldn't shake off the feeling that something had followed me down from the attic, lurking just beyond my vision. I turned on every light in the house, flooding every corner with brightness, hoping it would chase away the shadows that seemed to cling possessively to my surroundings. Unable to sleep, I decided to call a friend for comfort. "You won't believe what just happened," I began, recounting the incident while feeling absurdly foolish for sounding like the protagonist of a bad horror movie. My friend, with a laugh, brushed it off as an overactive imagination, but the laughter faded when I suddenly heard a soft, echoing giggle in the background, a sound so out of place and chilling that it froze the blood in my veins. My friend's voice trembled as it was a cold, rain-soaked evening when I first heard the whispering. I had moved into an old house on the outskirts of town, drawn by its quaint charm and vintage character, oblivious to the dark past that lingered within its walls. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the soft patter of raindrops against the window panes. On that first night, as I settled into my new home, I brushed off the strange feeling that crept over me. After all, every house has its quirks. As the days passed, though, the whispers grew louder, always just beyond the edge of comprehension, like the playful rustling of leaves that faded into silence before I could truly hear them. I attempted to ignore them, focusing instead on unpacking boxes and making the place my own, but each night, the whispers crept back, nagging at the edges of my mind. There were moments when I thought I saw shadows flicker in my peripheral vision, a dark movement in the corners of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing but the empty stillness of my living room. I convinced myself it was a trick of the light or my imagination playing games with me, but then the whispers began to take shape. They were soft at first, like echoes of distant conversations, but gradually morphed into distinct voices that called my name, drawing me towards the basement where the air was always colder, the darkness more profound. My curiosity soon consumed me, and one fateful night, I decided I would confront whatever was tormenting me. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way down the creaking stairs, the old wood groaning beneath my feet, as though warning me to turn back. Each step deeper filled me with dread. The air became heavier, pressing against my chest as I reached the bottom. The light flickered, casting long shadows across the damp concrete floor where I stood, paralyzed by fear and anticipation. And that's when I heard it, a clear voice calling my name, a mournful cry echoing through the dark. "Help me." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My heart raced as I scanned the room, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the darkness. I called out, trembling, "Who's there?" The only response was silence, suffocating and absolute. I felt an overwhelming urge to run back upstairs, to flee from the darkness that surrounded me, but instead, I forced myself to walk further into the room, each step a battle against the icy grip of fear. Just then, my flashlight illuminated a small, dusty mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. I approached it, compelled by an unknown force, and as I did, the whispers morphed into frantic cries, begging for release. I reached out to touch the glass, my fingertips brushing against the cool surface, and in that moment, the image in the mirror flickered. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't my reflection staring back at me. Instead, it was a girl, her eyes wide with terror, pleading silently for help. Her hair hung in matted clumps, and her clothes were tattered, as if she had been trapped for years. The cries grew louder, reverberating through my mind. "Release me," she whispered, her voice now desperate. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest, fighting the urge to scream. "How? What do you want from me?" I yelled, but she remained motionless, her eyes locking onto mine, pleading, urging me to understand. I realized in that moment that her existence was intertwined with this house, her spirit tethered to a past that refused to let go. Compelled by an unshakable need to help, I began to research the history of the house, uncovering tragic stories of the previous owners, a family shattered by grief, a little girl lost in the depths of despair. The lore spoke of rituals gone wrong and hauntings that had lingered for years, tales that mirrored my own experiences. I learned that she had been trapped, unable to move on, her spirit lingering in the shadows, waiting for someone to set her free. Armed with newfound knowledge, I returned to the basement, the whispers now a crescendo of urgency, spiraling around me. I set up candles in a circle, their flickering light battling the oppressive darkness. I recited the words I had memorized from an age-old cleansing ritual, my voice trembling yet unwavering. As each word left my lips, the temperature dropped, and the shadows writhed as if resisting my efforts. The mirror pulsed with energy, the girl's face growing more discernible, anguish written all over her ethereal features. "You must let me go," she cried softly, her voice wavering. With every ounce of strength and courage I could muster, I finished the incantation and shouted, "I set you free." The room erupted in chaos. The air crackled with intensity, and a blinding light sucked every shadow into its brilliance. I shielded my eyes as the whispers transformed into a melodic harmony, swirling around me like a gentle breeze, before fading into absolute silence. When I opened my eyes, the basement was empty, the mirror merely reflecting my stunned expression. I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. I had released her spirit, allowing her to finally rest. The haunting whispers ceased, and the oppressive darkness lifted from my home. Though the shadows were no longer filled with despair, I knew the echoes of that night would linger in my heart forever. Even now, as I sit in the quiet of this house, once a place of torment, it has transformed into a sanctuary. The memory of the girl remains a bittersweet whisper in my mind, a reminder of the connection we forged in the depths of despair and the power we hold to shape our destinies, even in the face of true horror. In the end, it wasn't just her freedom that was restored. I found my own in the process. It was a rainy evening when I decided to take a solitary walk through the nearby woods, seeking solace after a long week filled with stress. The trees stood tall, their leaves rustling softly in the wind, a soothing symphony that eased my mind. As I wandered deeper into the forest, the sunlight began to fade, casting eerie shadows that danced around me. I was about to turn back when I noticed an old, dilapidated cabin hidden behind a thick brush. Its wood was rotting, the windows shattered, and an unsettling aura surrounded it. Curiosity got the better of me, and despite my instincts urging me to leave, I stepped closer, drawn to the mystery of the place. The door creaked open with a gentle shove, revealing an unnaturally dark interior that swallowed the fading light. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and decay. I took a cautious step inside, hoping to quench my thirst for adventure. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through the broken windows. I felt an inexplicable chill crawling up my spine, a sense that something was very wrong. As I ventured further, the floorboards groaned under my weight, echoing through the emptiness. That's when I noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols I couldn't recognize, etched into the wood as if by desperate hands. They twisted and turned, forming patterns that were at once mesmerizing and grotesque. As I examined them, a sudden noise jolted me back to reality. A faint whisper seemed to echo from the back of the cabin, a voice that was low and guttural, murmuring words I couldn't understand. My heart raced as I struggled to discern if it was my imagination or something more sinister. Summoning my courage, I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My own voice sounded hollow against the oppressive silence that enveloped the cabin. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to leave, but my curiosity held me captive. The whispering continued, growing slightly louder but still just out of reach. I decided to follow it, my heart pounding in my chest. I approached a staircase that spiraled downward into darkness, a trapdoor below that I hadn't noticed before. The whispers beckoned me closer, weaving an intricate tapestry of dread and intrigue. I hesitated at the top, a fine sheen of sweat forming on my brow, the foreboding feeling amplifying with each passing second. Still, I felt compelled to descend into whatever lay below. As I reached the bottom, I fumbled around until my hands grazed the rough surface of the wall, and I soon found another set of symbols that were even more unsettling than those above. It was colder here, but the whispers transformed into agonized wails, piercing through the silence and sending shivers down my spine. Panic gripped me, and I realized that these were not mere whispers, but cries for help, trapped in this dark abyss. I wanted to turn back, to flee, but something rooted me in place. The cries resonated within me, touching a part of my soul that stirred with fear and sympathy. Then I heard my name. Help me. It was faint, barely a breath. I strained to hear it again. Please, help me. It was unmistakable. Someone needed me. I called out into the darkness. Who are you? Where are you? The silence that answered was deafening, yet the cries resumed, more frantic and desperate. Find me, before it's too late. The urging in the voice ignited a primal fear within me, but I pressed on, exploring the chilling confines of the basement. As I crept forward, I reached a corner where the cries intensified, reverberating off the damp stone walls. My heart raced, a mix of terror and resolve. I couldn't just leave someone behind. My fingers brushed against something, a relic of the past, perhaps. My hand trembled as I pulled it free, revealing an old locket, tarnished and worn. It felt alive in my hands, and with it came a surge of memories, images flooding my mind. I saw flashes of a girl, trapped and pleading, her eyes wide with fear. It was then the situation began to warp. Shadows twisted around me, foreign figures flickering in the edges of my vision. They were not human, twisted, gnarled, and dark, lingering just outside the glow of my fading candlelight, moaning softly, their forms barely tangible. The cries grew louder, echoing with a cacophony of despair that threatened to engulf me. Leave. Get out. They screamed in unison, a desperate chorus that rattled my bones. But I clutched the locket to my chest, my resolve solidifying. I knew I couldn't abandon whoever was trapped within these walls. I turned, intent on finding a way out, when something cold and clammy grasped my ankle, pulling me down into the darkness. I kicked and screamed, the shadows closing in, but I fought against them, scrambling desperately for the stairs. With each moment, the whispers became frenzy, the wails ringing in my ears. I tore myself free and fled up the stairs, heart pounding as I stumbled back into the main cabin. Just before I reached the door, the shadows surged, the air thick with a... It was a rainy evening when I decided to take a solitary walk through the nearby woods, seeking solace after a long week filled with stress. The trees stood tall, their leaves rustling softly in the wind, a soothing symphony that eased my mind. As I wandered deeper into the forest, the sunlight began to fade, casting eerie shadows that danced around me. I was about to turn back when I noticed an old, dilapidated cabin hidden behind the thick brush. Its wood was rotting, the windows shattered, and an unsettling aura surrounded it. Curiosity got the better of me, and despite my instincts urging me to leave, I stepped closer, drawn to the mystery of the place. The door creaked open with a gentle shove, revealing an unnaturally dark interior that swallowed the fading light. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and decay. I took a cautious step inside, hoping to quench my thirst for adventure. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through the broken windows. I felt an inexplicable chill crawling up my spine, a sense that something was very wrong. As I ventured further, the floorboards groaned under my weight, echoing through the emptiness. That's when I noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols I couldn't recognize, etched into the wood as if by desperate hands. They twisted and turned, forming patterns that were at once mesmerizing and grotesque. As I examined them, a sudden noise jolted me back to reality. A faint whisper seemed to echo from the back of the cabin, a voice that was low and guttural, murmuring words I couldn't understand. My heart raced as I struggled to discern if it was my imagination or something more sinister. Summoning my courage, I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My own voice sounded hollow against the oppressive silence that enveloped the cabin. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to leave, but my curiosity held me captive. The whispering continued, growing slightly louder but still just out of reach. I decided to follow it, my heart pounding in my chest. I approached a staircase that spiraled downward into darkness, a trapdoor below that I hadn't noticed before. The whispers beckoned me closer, weaving an intricate tapestry of dread and intrigue. I hesitated at the top, a fine sheen of sweat forming on my brow, the foreboding feeling amplifying with each passing second. Still, I felt compelled to descend into whatever lay below. As I reached the bottom, I fumbled around until my hands grazed the rough surface of the wall, and I soon found another set of symbols that were even more unsettling than those above. It was colder here, but the whispers transformed into agonized wails, piercing through the silence and sending shivers down my spine. Panic gripped me, and I realized that these were not mere whispers, but cries for help, trapped in this dark abyss. I wanted to turn back, to flee, but something rooted me in place. The cries resonated within me, touching a part of my soul that stirred with fear and sympathy. Then I heard my name. Help me. It was faint, barely a breath. I strained to hear it again. Please, help me. It was unmistakable. Someone needed me. I called out into the darkness. Who are you? Where are you? It was a chill evening when I first arrived at the old house inherited from my late grandmother. Nestled deep in the woods, it stood like a ghost of a time gone by, a two-story structure, its once bright paint now peeling, hinting at years of neglect. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and trepidation as I parked my car, the crunch of leaves underfoot echoing in the silence. I was alone, despite reassuring myself that I'd be fine. After all, it was just an old house, filled with memories. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced eerily among the trees, and I felt the chill of dusk settle in. I entered through the creaky front door, its hinges protesting with a mournful creak that seemed to echo my own unease. The air inside smelled musty, thick with the scent of dust and decay. The house was draped in dark shadows, the only light coming from the fading afternoon sun that barely penetrated the heavy curtains. As I unpacked a few essentials, I felt watched, an inexplicable sensation that sent prickles up my spine. I shook it off, attributing it to my overactive imagination fueled by countless horror movies. After setting up my sleeping arrangements in what was once my grandmother's room, I decided to explore. The house, though forlorn, was fascinating, filled with old photographs, dusty furniture, and relics of a time long past. I found a dusty attic filled with boxes, cobwebs hanging like forgotten dreams. Among the clutter, an old trunk caught my eye. It was locked, but my curiosity overwhelmed any sense of caution. I pried it open with a crowbar I found nearby, and as the lid creaked open, a musty smell wafted out, making me gag. Inside lay old letters, some yellowed with age and others brittle, along with a crumpled photograph of a woman. She looked eerily similar to me, her eyes gazing back with an intensity that made my heart race. The letters detailed a family history I had never known, riddled with tales of loss, tragedy, and darkness. They spoke of a cycle that seemed to curse the women in my lineage, suggesting that many had met tragic ends or suffered unspeakable fates. I felt a chill run down my spine as one particular letter described a haunting, a malevolent spirit that had plagued my family for generations. Fear gripped me, but a morbid curiosity held me captive, compelling me to read on. That night, as I lay in bed, the shadows whispered to me. I imagined them swirling around, taunting me with the secrets they held. Sleep eluded me, the silence oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. Just as I began to drift into an uneasy slumber, a loud thud jolted me awake. My heart raced as I glanced around the dim room, the shadows seeming to twist and move in the corners of my vision. I mustered the courage to investigate, tiptoeing down the hallway, the floorboards groaning under my weight. As I moved towards the source of the noise, I felt that familiar sense of... It was a chill evening when I first arrived at the old house inherited from my late grandmother. Nestled deep in the woods, it stood like a ghost of a time gone by, a two-story structure, its once bright paint now peeling, hinting at years of neglect. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and trepidation as I parked my car, the crunch of leaves underfoot echoing in the silence. I was alone, despite reassuring myself that I'd be fine. After all, it was just an old house, filled with memories. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced eerily among the trees, and I felt the chill of dusk settle in. I entered through the creaky front door, its hinges protesting with a mournful creak that seemed to echo my own unease. The air inside smelled musty, thick with the scent of dust and decay. The house was draped in dark shadows, the only light coming from the fading afternoon sun that barely penetrated the heavy curtains. As I unpacked a few essentials, I felt watched, an inexplicable sensation that sent prickles up my spine. I shook it off, attributing it to my overactive imagination fueled by countless horror movies. After setting up my sleeping arrangements in what was once my grandmother's room, I decided to explore. The house, though forlorn, was fascinating, filled with old photographs, dusty furniture, and relics of a time long past. I found a dusty attic filled with boxes, cobwebs hanging like forgotten dreams. Among the clutter, an old trunk caught my eye. It was locked, but my curiosity overwhelmed any sense of caution. I pried it open with a crowbar I found nearby, and as the lid creaked open, a musty smell wafted out, making me gag. Inside lay old letters, some yellowed with age and others brittle, along with a crumpled photograph of a woman. She looked eerily similar to me, her eyes gazing back with an intensity that made my heart race. The letters detailed a family history I had never known, riddled with tales of loss, tragedy, and darkness. They spoke of a cycle that seemed to curse the women in my lineage, suggesting that many had met tragic ends or suffered unspeakable fates. I felt a chill run down my spine as one particular letter described a haunting, a malevolent spirit that had plagued my family for generations. Fear gripped me, but a morbid curiosity held me captive, compelling me to read on. That night, as I lay in bed, the shadows whispered to me. I imagined them swirling around, taunting me with the secrets they held. Sleep eluded me. I never believed in the supernatural. I spent my childhood dismissing ghost stories as mere figments of overactive imaginations. My skepticism followed me into adulthood, and it wasn't until I moved into an old, creaky house on the outskirts of town that my perspective began to unravel. I had stumbled upon the place quite accidentally. It was an unassuming, two-story structure with peeling paint and a rickety fence that clung to its last remains of paint. The price was right, and ambition got the better of me. All was fine for the first few weeks. I spent my days unpacking boxes, setting up furniture, and relishing newfound solitude. However, shortly after settling in, I began noticing things that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The first occurrence was subtle. One evening, while I was preparing dinner, I felt a chill pass through the room. I brushed it off as a draft coming from the ill-fitted windows. But then, I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, as if someone had leaned in close to my ear only to retreat into silence. I scanned the room, half expecting a friend to jump out and yell, "Gotcha," but found only emptiness. My unease grew, but I told myself it was merely an echo of my imagination. The whispers continued over the next few weeks, growing ever so slightly more distinct. They seemed to call my name, carrying an almost affectionate tone, like a gentle mother beckoning her child. I was perplexed and frightened. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, I felt an unsettling presence. It was palpable, like an unseen weight pressing down on me. I courageously flicked on the bedside lamp, attempting to shatter the silence. My heart raced as I noticed a fleeting shadow dart across the far corner of the room. Clenching my fists, I told myself it was my imagination playing tricks, but the next morning, I found a child's drawing on the floor, scrawled in a crayon that I didn't own. It depicted a small figure with large, dark eyes gazing up at a towering shadow. The sight sent chills down my spine, and I felt compelled to research the house's history. Weeks of investigation revealed that the house had a long, tragic past. It had belonged to a family in the early 1900s, a mother and her two children. The youngest, a girl named Lily, had gone missing one stormy night, and her body was never found. The story haunted me, and I wondered if the whisper I'd been hearing belonged to her spirit, seeking recognition or solace. Despite the growing dread, I found myself drawn to the child's drawing, a connection formed through some unseen thread. I would wake up each night, hearing her soft cries that transformed into whispers, growing more fervent as the nights passed. In an attempt to quell my fear and confront whatever was haunting me, I set up a small table in the corner of my bedroom, adorned with a candle, one of the child's drawings, and a few trinkets in hopes of appeasing her spirit. Nothing prepared me for the night it happened. I awoke to find my bed shaking violently, sheets torn from my body as if pulled by an invisible force. In that moment, panic surged, and I leapt out of bed, frantically searching for the source. I glanced at the corner where I'd placed Lily's drawing and gasped. There she was, a small translucent figure staring back at me, her expression a blend of sorrow and desperation. The fear that engulfed me was insatiable. I stumbled backward until I hit the wall, heart racing, voice trembling as I whispered, "What do you want?" Her small finger pointed to the drawings I had placed on the table, and then, with a faint, sorrowful smile, she vanished. That night felt eternal. I scarcely slept, haunted by the vision and the swirling questions that filled my mind. Why did she haunt me? What was she trying to tell me? Days bled into weeks, and the whispers grew frantic. I listened carefully, piecing together a chilling narrative. I learned that Lily had been searching for closure, perhaps acknowledgement of her existence and her tragic fate. As nights passed, I felt compelled to confront the house's dark history. I researched more fervently, tracing Lily's lost footsteps. Eventually, I discovered the name of a local historian who had written extensively about the family's disappearance. I arranged to meet with her, desperate for answers. She spoke of local folklore, whispering dark tales of spirits trapped between worlds, and she urged me to hold a seance to release Lily's spirit. With trembling hands, I prepared for that fateful night. I lit candles around the living room, set an extra seat for Lily, and recited words learned from ancient texts, begging for her presence to manifest once more. The air thickened, emotions lingered, and the temperature dropped significantly. Moments passed, and just as I began to doubt, whispers filled the room, forming a symphony of soft, pleading voices, not just Lily's, but many more. It was a cacophony of sorrow and desperation. The walls seemed to respond, trembling as if they, too, longed for release. In that moment, I realized the depth of their pain, the longing for recognition, to be remembered. I called out through tears, "I see you. You are not forgotten." The whispers crescendoed, and I felt the heaviness lift. A warmth enveloped me, as if their spirits acknowledged my words. In the silence that followed, Lily appeared again, her expression now peaceful, her small form shimmering with light. One last glance, and she vanished. The night surrendered to the dawn, the weight of the house had lifted, and the whispers faded into a tranquil silence. Months have passed since that night, and although I still reside in the old house, the shadows feel different now, less daunting. It's eerie how the very things that once terrified me transformed into a bond nurtured by understanding. Perhaps they just needed someone to listen. I still find drawings scattered around the house, but now they've ceased to take on a haunting aspect. They are remnants of a story shared and a spirit at rest. As for me, I learned that sometimes, embracing the unknown leads us to uncover not only the horrors that haunt us, but also the deep connections that bind us across the veil of life and death. It was the summer of 2003 when I moved into my grandmother's old house, a creaky, two-story relic that stood at the edge of a dense forest in the small town of Broomfield. I had always loved this place as a child. It was where I spent countless weekends running through the woods, exploring the garden, and listening to my grandmother's enchanting stories of ghosts and spirits. But as an adult, the charm of the old house faded, and its walls felt heavy with history, secrets buried beneath layers of dust and silence. I had recently lost my job and decided to stay here for a while, hoping the solitude would help me clear my mind. The first few nights passed quietly, the only sounds the occasional creak of the house settling and the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. But on the fourth night, things took a turn. I awoke suddenly, feeling an unsettling presence in the room. My heart raced as I strained to hear any sounds, but all I could hear was my own breath and the eerie, still air. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. The following night, however, would prove me wrong. I heard a distinct whisper, almost like a soft lullaby, drifting down the hallway. Confused and curious, I got out of bed and walked towards the sound. The air grew colder as I approached. The whisper transformed into faint, almost inaudible words that felt like old memories floating in the darkness. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows twisting and contorting in the flickering light of my flashlight. I followed the voice, feeling both drawn in and terrified. When I reached the end of the hallway, I found the door to the attic slightly ajar, a faint glow seeping through the crack. Hesitating for a moment, I pushed the door open and was greeted by a musty scent and a scene that chilled my blood. The attic was filled with memorabilia from my grandmother's life. Old photographs, dusty toys, and faded clothes, all laid out as if someone had just been through them. But it was the corner of the room that caught my attention. A small, antique mirror stood there, its surface tarnished but still reflective enough to show my pale, frightened face. I stepped closer, and as I gazed into it, something shifted behind me, a fleeting shadow, just at the edge of my vision. My heart raced as I turned, but there was nothing there, only the emptiness of the attic. I felt an inexplicable urge to reach out and touch the mirror, as if it were calling to me. As my fingers brushed against the cold surface, a chilling sensation coursed through me, and the whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind. They weren't just meaningless sounds. They were words I could almost understand. "Help us," they pleaded, a sorrowful chorus. Panic set in as I stumbled back, nearly tripping over an old trunk that lay forgotten in the corner. My instinct was to flee, but something held me there. The atmosphere thickened, charged with an energy that was both terrifying and oddly compelling. I forced myself to look back at the mirror, and that's when I saw it. A figure, faint but recognizable, standing behind me. My grandmother, her familiar face twisted in anguish, her lips moving but no sound escaping. I turned to face her, but she dissolved into shadows, leaving me trembling in the echo of her presence. I scrambled backward into the dim, cluttered attic, my breath quickening as the whispers became almost frantic. "Find us, remember." I ran back to my room, slamming the door behind me, the relentless murmurs chasing me into the safety of sleep, or so I hoped. Over the next few nights, my sleep was plagued by nightmares, visions of a life I didn't know, of tragedy and sorrow that seemed intertwined with my family's past. One evening, determined to uncover the truth, I rummaged through my grandmother's old journal I found lying among the attic's clutter. Each page was filled with her elegant handwriting, chronicling moments of joy and heartache, interspersed with tales of grief that had woven through generations. One entry struck me particularly hard, the mention of a family member who had gone missing during a storm decades earlier, a name I had heard whispered in hushed conversations but had never fully understood. As I read those words, the whispers returned, wrapping around me like a heavy fog, becoming more insistent. "Find her. She's lost." I felt a desperate need to uncover what lay behind those words. The next evening, armed with a flashlight and an inexplicable resolve, I returned to the attic, determined to confront whatever presence lingered there. As I stepped into the dusty space, the air crackled with tension. The mirror reflected my wide eyes, seemingly watching me. I held my breath as I placed my hand against the surface again, and the cold seeped into my skin, igniting memories long buried deep within my heart. The whispers grew louder, intensifying until I screamed, "What do you want?" Silence fell, thick and heavy, before a single voice emerged, clearer this time. "Free us." My hands trembled as I frantically searched the attic for anything that might reveal the truth about my family's past. That's when I found the trunk I had previously stumbled over. Inside, beneath a pile of old clothes, lay a collection of letters, yellowed with age. They were from my grandmother, addressed to the missing family member, the cousin whose name had haunted our family. The words unfurled a tragic tale of love, loss, and a desperate search that had never ended. Each letter was filled with longing and a spirit that refused to be forgotten. That night, as the full moon bathed the house in its silvery glow, I placed the letters before the mirror, hoping that this act of remembrance would bring peace to the spirits who had lingered too long. As I spoke their names aloud, the whispers transformed into a harmonious hum, a soothing melody that enveloped the attic. The air lightened, and as I turned back towards the mirror, tears streamed down my face. The figure appeared again, this time with a gentle smile, her sadness replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude. With a soft, shimmering glow, she reached out, and in that moment, I felt a strange peace wash over me. The house, once heavy with sorrow, began to feel lighter, as if the weight of the past was finally being lifted. The whispers faded, replaced by a serene silence that hummed with the promise of healing. On that night, as I crawled into bed, something shifted in the atmosphere, and I finally felt the comforting embrace of my grandmother's spirit around me. No longer a specter of sorrow, but a guardian of memories, watching over those who had come before and finding solace in their truth. The next morning, the attic felt different, as if a chapter had closed, and the echoes of the past had finally found peace. I realized that sometimes, the most profound horrors lie not in the presence of the unknown, but in the stories we carry and the connections that linger, waiting for someone to listen. When I was a child, my family moved to a small, remote town that seemed practically frozen in time, a place where the streets whispered secrets and the shadows had lives of their own. Our new house was an old Victorian relic with creaky floorboards, peeling wallpaper, and an attic that loomed like a sleeping giant above us. It was the kind of house that inspired stories of ghostly inhabitants and untold horrors, but I was just a child, more intrigued by the hidden corners and the wonder of exploration than the ominous presence that seemed to lurk in the corners of my mind. One evening, while rummaging through the attic, I stumbled upon a dusty trunk tucked away beneath a pile of old blankets. Its rusty hinges groaned as I opened it, revealing items from a forgotten past, a faded diary, a cracked porcelain doll with a missing eye, and an assortment of yellowed photographs. The photos were of a family, their faces frozen in time, but there was something off about them. Their smiles felt forced, their eyes seemed to look right through me, and in the corner of one photo, I noticed a shadowy figure lurking just beyond the frame, barely discernible but undeniably there. The air felt thick as I pressed the diary open, its pages filled with neat handwriting that began innocuously enough but soon took a darker turn. The entry spoke of strange occurrences, whispers in the night, shadows moving on their own, and the inexplicable loss of time. As I read, I could almost hear the echo of a child's laughter, a haunting melody weaving through my thoughts. Night after night, I returned to the attic, drawn deeper into the story of the family who once lived in the house. A chill crept down my spine as I realized that the last entries detailed a growing madness, a sense of being watched, and a sinister entity that fed off the fear of its inhabitants. I decided to confront my growing dread by speaking to the neighbors. They were tight-lipped at first, exchanging wary glances before an elderly woman finally broke the silence. She revealed that the family had vanished without a trace, leaving the house to fester in its own despair. Strange sounds, she warned, had been heard emanating from the attic even years after they were gone, and children dared each other to approach the house after dark, only to retreat in fear. Late one night, emboldened by curiosity but plagued by anxiety, I decided to spend the night in the attic. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a blanket, I settled on the wooden floor, the air thick with anticipation. Hours passed in silence, the only sound being the soft creaks of the house settling around me. Just as I began to doze, a faint sound pierced the stillness, a soft, melodic giggle echoing from the darkness. My heart raced, and I sat up, my fingers tightening around the flashlight. The giggling stopped suddenly. A heavy silence enveloped me. I recalled the diary's words about the entity that thrived on fear, and I struggled to shake the grip of terror that clutched my chest. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted movement. A shadow flickered beyond the window, and though my instincts screamed for me to run, I had to know. I crept toward the window, heart pounding, and peered into the night. Nothing was there, only the pale glow of the moon casting eerie shadows across the yard. I turned back, but the air felt different, thick with an unseen presence. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. I could feel it. The sensation of being watched was now tangible, as if invisible eyes bore into me. The temperature plummeted, and my breath hung in the air like a ghost. A bone-chilling whisper invaded my senses, and I realized it was a voice, soft and pleading, almost like a child's, calling my name. Panic surged through me as I scrambled back, trying to escape the grip of the unknown, when I felt a cold hand brush against my shoulder. I froze, paralyzed by fear, the diary's warnings echoing in my mind. I whipped around, but there was nothing, just the emptiness of the attic staring back at me. That night, I fled back to my bedroom, heart racing and mind spinning, convinced that the diary had somehow awakened something buried deep within the walls of that home. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to forget what had happened, but the shadow in the attic refused to release its grip. Every night, I felt a palpable weight on my chest, as if unseen hands were pressing down, suffocating me in my sleep. My dreams became nightmares, filled with dark figures and whispers that called to me from the shadows, luring me back to the attic, promising to show me what I couldn't understand. One night, I woke to find my bedroom door slowly creaking open, revealing a silhouette standing just outside, small, fragile, and eerily familiar, with empty eyes that mirrored the doll I had found in the trunk. I couldn't breathe as it stepped forward, its empty gaze fixated on me, and I could hear the echo of the giggle that had haunted my dreams. I darted out of bed, running down the hallway, desperate to escape the haunting presence that seemed to follow me. I sprinted into the living room, heart racing, where I found my parents, oblivious to the darkness that lurked beyond the walls. When I tried to explain, they dismissed my fears as childhood imagination. I needed them to understand that something was wrong, that I wasn't safe, but my words fell flat. Days later, I decided to confront the attic once and for all. I climbed the creaky staircase, the air growing colder with each step. Armed with a flashlight and the diary, I demanded to know what it wanted from me. The shadows seemed to swirl around me, alive with a suffocating intensity, and I felt the pressure building, wrapping around my throat until I could barely breathe. And then, silence. The shadows receded, pillowing the space in a deep stillness. As I stood there, I felt something touch my hair, light and gentle, as if urging me to listen. With a shaky breath, I opened the diary and read the final entry aloud. It spoke of a tragic end for the family, of despair that birthed anger and sorrow, and how the entity had taken refuge in the attic, feeding off their fear. In that moment, it was as if the air shifted. The weight on my chest lifted, the house exhaled, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of understanding. I closed my eyes and whispered a promise, to remember, to acknowledge the pain that had echoed through those walls. When I opened my eyes, the shadows had dissolved, leaving behind a serene calm. I descended from the attic, heart lighter than it had been in weeks, and I knew somehow that I had forged a tenuous connection with the past. Though it was far from over, a veil had lifted, and maybe, just maybe, the darkness was beginning to fade. From that day on, the house felt different, as though a burden had been released. The shadows still danced in the corners, but now they felt less oppressive, almost protective. The old Victorian stood resilient, a keeper of stories, and together, we learned to coexist, allowing the past to flow through us and reminding me that some horrors were not meant to be feared, but understood. The room was dim, the flickering light casting shadows that danced across the walls. I sat alone, the weight of silence heavy around me, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. I'd recently moved in, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, seeking solace in the tranquil embrace of the countryside. It seemed idyllic, at least until the sun dipped below the horizon, shrouding the surroundings in a heavy veil of darkness. On my first night, I heard a barely perceptible whisper, a sound so faint I wondered if it was merely my mind playing tricks. It settled in the back of my consciousness, an unsettling feeling that left me restless. The second night, the whispers returned, more insistent now, almost as if they were calling my name. I tried to rationalize it, blaming the creaks and groans of an old house. The walls had stories, I told myself, rich with history, but deep down, I felt an unease creeping in, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. As days turned into weeks, I began to notice peculiar things. Objects that would go missing only to reappear in strange places, the chilling draft that would sweep through the hallways, or the flickering of lights when I was alone. Friends assured me it was nothing, perhaps just the quirks of a vintage home. I wanted to believe them, but there was something more lurking in the corner of my mind, a nagging dread that I couldn't shake. The whispers gained clarity eventually, morphing into coherent voices. "Help me," they implored, and I felt the chill clawing up my spine that night. I sat up in bed, heart racing, as I listened intently for any sign that I was imagining it. "Help me," the voices cried again, swirling around me like a tempest. Compelled by a force I couldn't understand, I sought the source of the whispers. My investigation led me to the attic, a space I had previously avoided. The old wooden door creaked open with an eerie groan, unveiling a room cloaked in shadow and dust. As I climbed the rickety stairs, a sense of foreboding washed over me, yet curiosity propelled me forward. Boxes piled high were filled with forgotten remnants of someone's life, dusty photographs, tattered clothes, and brittle letters yellowed with age, each holding a story of its own. One photograph, in particular, caught my eye, an image of a woman, her eyes strikingly alive, filled with sorrow that seemed to penetrate through time. But there was something unsettling about her smile. It felt forced, as if she had secrets lurking behind that facade. The whispers intensified, leading me to an old journal buried beneath a pile of decaying newspapers. The pages crumbled as I opened it, revealing stories of loss, isolation, and desperation. "I need to be free," one entry read, the handwriting trembling with anguish. It told of a woman left alone in this very house, tormented by the demons of her past, desperate for liberation from a life she felt trapped in. I felt a chill as I turned the pages, an undeniable connection forming between her words and my own sense of dread. Each line twisted the knife of sadness deeper into my heart, revealing layers of despair I longed to unearth. Days slipped by like a river flowing into an endless abyss. My nights consumed by the chilling whispers that grew stronger, more demanding. I felt her presence, a desperate energy swirling around me, reaching out from the pages that had become my obsession. "Help me," it echoed in my mind, and I realized the house was haunted, not by the malevolent spirits of malicious intentions, but by a soul in torment, yearning for peace. Night after night, I returned to the attic, piecing together her story, uncovering fragments of her life until it became a desperate mission. The only way I could help her was to bring the truth to light. As I unearthed more details, the shadows in the corners deepened, tendrils of darkness reaching for me as if resentful of the attention I was giving to the memories of their prisoner. The bitter chill that wrapped around me felt like fingers of the past, gripping tighter with each passing moment. It was a stormy night when I finally pieced it all together: betrayal, heartache, and the despair that followed her like a shroud. She had been wronged in life, bound by the chains of the circumstances that led her to this very room, and I understood. I owed her, not just my sympathy, but the release she had sought for too long. The room was dim, the flickering light casting shadows that danced across the walls. I sat alone, the weight of silence heavy around me, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. I'd recently moved in, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, seeking solace in the tranquil embrace of the countryside. It seemed idyllic, at least until the sun dipped below the horizon, shrouding the surroundings in a heavy veil of darkness. On my first night, I heard a barely perceptible whisper, a sound so faint I wondered if it was merely my mind playing tricks. It settled in the back of my consciousness, an unsettling feeling that left me restless. The second night, the whispers returned, more insistent now, almost as if they were calling my name. I tried to rationalize it, blaming the creaks and groans of an old house. The walls had stories, I told myself, rich with history, but deep down, I felt an unease creeping in, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. As days turned into weeks, I began to notice peculiar things. Objects that would go missing only to reappear in strange places, the chilling draft that would sweep through the hallway. I remember the day vividly, as if it were etched in my memory with a fine-tipped pen. It was late fall, and the days were growing shorter, the sun dipping below the horizon much earlier than I would have liked. I had just moved to a small, remote town called Eldridge Hollow, eager to escape the bustle of city life and the stresses that came with it. My new home was an old Victorian house that creaked and groaned with age, the walls whispering secrets to anyone who dared to listen. At first, it seemed charming, the kind of place where I could unwind and find myself again. Little did I know that the very atmosphere I found enchanting would soon become a harbinger of unending dread. Within the first week, I began to notice strange occurrences. It started subtly. I would enter a room and feel an inexplicable chill, like a cold breath on the back of my neck. But whenever I turned around, I found only empty space. I brushed it off as my imagination, a trick of the mind in a new and unfamiliar place. But as days turned into weeks, the incidents escalated. I began hearing soft whispers during the night, enough to jolt me from my sleep. Yet when I listened closely, the words slipped away like smoke in the wind. I spent hours pacing my darkened halls, the air thick with an unseen heaviness, trying to find solace in the rational. I convinced myself that they were merely the sounds of an old house settling, but the feeling of being watched stirred a primal fear deep within me. On one particularly cold evening, as the wind howled outside, I decided to explore the attic, a part of the house I had yet to venture into. The moment I opened the trapdoor, an unsettling sensation washed over me, a profound sense of wrongness. The air was stale, filled with the musty scent of forgotten memories. I climbed the rickety stairs, each creak echoing like a whisper, begging me to turn back. The attic was filled with dusty furniture and boxes overflowing with old junk. But in the far corner, hidden beneath a tattered sheet, was an ornate mirror framed in tarnished gold. I felt inexplicably drawn to it, a magnetic pull urging me closer. As I stood before it, I felt a chill run down my spine. My reflection seemed distorted, as though something lurked behind me, just beyond the edge of the glass. I took a deep breath, compelled to touch the surface, but the moment my fingers brushed against it, a wave of nausea swept over me, and I stumbled back, heart racing. That night, the whispers returned, more insistent than before, urgent and filled with sorrow. I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning as shadows danced across my walls, flickering like candle flames caught in a draft. I used to think horror was confined to movies and novels, but now I was living in a waking nightmare. I needed answers, so I visited the local library, hoping to uncover the history of my home. The librarian, an elderly woman with piercing gray eyes, regarded me with a knowing look when I asked about the Victorian. "Ah, the Whitmore house," she murmured, her voice trembling like dry leaves in the wind. "They say it's haunted by the spirit of a young girl who died under mysterious circumstances. She lingers, searching for something, perhaps lost to time." I felt a shiver run through me, her words revealing a darkness I had been unconsciously aware of but had fiercely tried to deny. The more I learned about the Whitmores, the more unsettling the house became. It is said the girl had a sister, and after her tragic death, the sister was never the same. Family whispers spoke of madness, of shadows creeping through their lives, consuming them one by one. I returned home with a heavy heart, my mind racing with the information I had gathered. That night, the whispers transformed into cries, desperate wails ringing through the halls. I was paralyzed by fear, ensnared in my own home as the air thickened, seemingly alive with torment. As I lay in bed, the oppressive weight of despair wrapped around me. A haunting melody began to weave through the darkness, the voice of a girl calling out. "Help me," it pleaded, dejected and sorrowful. I felt compelled to respond, sensing a connection I couldn't explain. "What do you need?" I whispered into the shadows, hoping against hope to find a thread of the girl's lost peace. But only silence answered. This torment continued for weeks, each night a descent into madness as the cries grew louder, echoing in my mind, blending with my dreams until I could no longer tell where reality ended and my subconscious began. Then, one dismal evening, as the wind howled outside like a banshee, I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. Armed with a candle and the courage I could muster, I climbed to the attic once more, determined to face the unknown. The mirror stood stark and imposing, a portal to another realm that shimmered with an eerie light. I spoke to it, demanding the spirit to reveal herself. "I want to help you," I shouted, desperation pouring from my lips. To my horror, the surface of the mirror began to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. Images flickered into view, flashes of a young girl playing in a sunlit garden, laughing, and then, abruptly, darkness. I watched in terror as the scene transformed into chaos. The girl was deep in anguish, grasping at shadows while looking for something she could not find. I reached out, my hand trembling as I pressed it against the glass. Suddenly, a surge of energy pulsed through me, and for a brief moment, I felt her sorrow flooding my thoughts, intertwining with my very essence. "Help me find her," the voice pleaded, an echo of despair that left me breathless. Before I could comprehend what was happening, the mirror shattered, sending shards flying in every direction, cutting into the haze of night surrounding me. I stumbled back, heart racing as I felt both liberated and ensnared. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of a figure moving within the fragments, a spectral silhouette of the girl, forever reaching for something just out of reach, eternally trapped between worlds. The screams were deafening now, a cacophony of anguish that felt like it was tearing my soul apart. I ran, desperately escaping the suffocating terror. I fled the house, the splintered remnants of the mirror trailing behind me like broken promises. I never returned to Eldridge Hollow again. The escape was a dark chapter one hoped to forget, a horror that lingered long after the last screams faded. But as I moved on, settling into a new life, I often found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see her, soul still lost, eternally searching for whatever had been taken from her, a reminder that some horrors do not fade with time, nor do they remain contained within the walls of a house. They follow you, lingering in the shadows, and the moment you dare to forget, they come rushing back, demanding to be heard. I always thought of myself as a rational person, grounded in reality, unbothered by the ghost stories that danced around the campfires of my childhood. Yet, there was that moment when the line between what I deemed real and what existed in the shadows blurred, an experience that unraveled my understanding of fear. It all began in the quiet town of Maplewood, a place where everyone knew each other and secrets were like hushed whispers between best friends. I had moved there in search of solace, a break from the chaos of city life that had started to suffocate me. The little house I rented on Elm Street was charming, with creaking floorboards and ivy curling around the porch, but it held an unsettling presence I couldn't shake. The previous tenants had left in a hurry. A quick glance at the faded walls and scuffed tiles suggested they had left something behind, something unspoken. I brushed it off, convincing myself that houses carry memories, and this one simply craved a touch of warmth. The neighbors were welcoming, though they wore an air of caution around me that piqued my curiosity. They spoke in hushed tones about the house and its past, offering vague hints that something had gone horribly wrong there, but I was too wrapped up in my own peace to pay attention. Each day consisted of unpacking boxes and indulging in the luxury of solitude. The silence of the house was comforting, though it began to feel thick, like a heavy fog. One night, while rearranging my new bookshelf, I heard a soft thud from the attic above. Dismissing it as the settling of an old building, I shook my head. But then the sound came again, persistent and rhythmic, as though something or someone was shifting around up there. After pacing the room for a while, curiosity gnawed at me. I grabbed a flashlight and pulled down the creaky attic stairs. As I ascended, the air turned frigid, as if I had stepped into another world. Dust particles floated lazily in the beam of my flashlight. The attic was a cramped space filled with forgotten furniture covered in white sheets and boxes stacked haphazardly. I scanned the room, half expecting a raccoon or perhaps an errant squirrel, but all I found was the emptiness echoing back at me. Just as I was about to dismiss my imagination as overactive, I spotted something in the corner, a small trunk, worn and ancient, with dark wood that seemed to breathe secrets. I couldn't resist. I approached and lifted the lid, a cloud of dust rising to meet the beam of light. Inside lay an assortment of trinkets, yellowed photographs, a dusty porcelain doll, and journals filled with spidery handwriting. My heart raced with excitement, my fingers trembling as I touched them. The journals were a treasure trove of the past, detailing the life of a woman named Lila who had lived in the house decades ago. Her words spoke of dreams and despair, of love lost to time, and an inexplicable darkness that began to creep into her life. But what struck me most were the last entries, frantic and disjointed, detailing her fear of a presence in the house, a shadow that brought with it a palpable sense of dread. "It watches me," she wrote. "It waits for me to be alone. I fear I am not alone here." As I read, an icy chill snaked down my spine. I felt the air around me shift, a suffocating weight pressing against my chest. I glanced around the attic, heart pounding in my ears, and the feeling of being watched washed over me, sending adrenaline coursing through my body. I fled the attic, leaving the journals scattered on the floor. That night, I locked my bedroom door, though I knew it offered little comfort. Sleep eluded me as the whispers of Lila's words replayed in my mind, each syllable intertwining with my own growing unease. A week passed, and I tried to push the fear back into the recesses of my mind, convincing myself that it was simply the overwhelming power of suggestion. But the unsettling feeling clung to me like a shadow. I noticed odd occurrences, objects moved from their places, fleeting sounds echoing through the halls, and unsettling dreams that left me gasping for breath. Each night, the sensation of being watched thickened until I could barely bear it. My once peaceful sanctuary had morphed into a prison of fear. One fateful night, I awoke to a whisper, soft yet clear, calling my name from the dark corners of my room. My heart thundered in my chest, and I strained to listen. "Help me," it breathed. I was paralyzed with terror, unable to discern whether it was my mind playing tricks or something far more sinister. Summoning every ounce of courage, I switched on the lamp, heart pounding as light flooded the room. Nothing. Just me and the oppressive silence. Was it real, or had my mind finally fractured? As days turned into sleepless nights, I found myself returning to Lila's journals, desperate for answers. Each word etched deeper into my psyche, unraveling the tapestry of fear woven around me. It became clear that Lila's plight was a warning. The presence she feared had not merely haunted her, it thrived on isolation. With her isolation, it fed. It gnawed at my sanity, turning my every thought into wraith-like echoes as I spiraled into an abyss of dread. I sought help, confiding in neighbors, but they only exchanged glances filled with sympathy and fear. "Leave," they urged, their voices trembling. Yet, I was entangled in something darker. Leaving felt like surrendering to whatever lingered behind my closed doors. I made up my mind. I would confront it, this presence that had morphed into a twisted part of my existence. Armed with the journals and a candle, I returned to the attic, heart racing as the air thickened with anticipation. I called out to it, demanding to know what it wanted. The darkness coiled tighter around me, and then, just as I felt I could no longer bear the pressure, the shadows whispered back. "I am here." It breathed, not as a voice but a sensation, like ice seeping through my veins. But I refused to succumb. I recited Lila's words aloud, words that had become my armor against the suffocating darkness. The shadows receded momentarily, and for an instant, I felt an incredible power surge through me. It was as if I had reignited the light in a room long left in darkness. This confrontation was not just for me, but for Lila, for every soul entwined in its grasp. But as dawn broke, the shadows retreated, leaving me breathless yet intact. I could no longer stay in that house, a vessel of darkness. I left behind the remnants of Lila's life, the journals and the trunk, allowing it to be a testament to the battles fought within those walls. Maplewood was no longer my sanctuary. It was a place I had learned held far more meaning than I had ever anticipated. I moved away, leaving the haunted chapters behind, Yet Lila's story remained with me, a reminder that the darkest corners of our lives often hold truths we must confront. The house on Elm Street stands now under the weight of untold stories, waiting for another to brave the shadows, knowing that some stories are meant to be left untold, and some shadows should never be provoked. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the forest as I drove along a narrow dirt road, the crunch of gravel beneath my tires echoing in the quiet night. I was heading to my uncle's old cabin, a place he had left me in his will, far from the city lights and noise, promising isolation and peace. The long drive had been uneventful, with only the occasional flicker of wildlife crossing the road. As I pulled up to the cabin, an unsettling feeling washed over me. The trees surrounding it loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying eerily in the wind. I hesitated for a moment before grabbing my bags and stepping out of the car, the cool night air prickling my skin. The cabin was rustic, deeply embedded in the woods, its wooden frame weathered and aged, the front porch creaking slightly as I stepped onto it. Inside, the atmosphere was thick, as if the very air was laden with memories. Dust motes swirled in the beam of my flashlight as I surveyed the living room, where old furniture sat in silence, each piece bearing the weight of stories untold. A sense of nostalgia washed over me, mixed with an overwhelming urge to leave this place behind. Shaking off the feeling, I hung my jacket by the door and began unpacking. As night fell, I lit a fire in the old stone fireplace, the crackling flames flickering shadows across the walls, creating an uneasy dance of light and dark. I settled into an old chair with a worn-out book that had belonged to my uncle, hoping to get lost in its pages. Time slipped away as the comfortable crackle of the fire surrounded me, yet unease clung to me, like a chill in the air. Suddenly, a noise startled me, a rustling sound coming from outside the cabin. I paused, straining to listen. It was as if something was moving just beyond the edge of the trees. I rose and peered through the window, my heart racing at the thought of an animal close by, but I saw nothing. Just darkness, impenetrable and thick, cloaked in shadows. Deciding it was probably just the wind, I turned back to my chair, but sleep eluded me. Hours passed, and each creak of the cabin seemed to echo in the silence. When I finally drifted off, I was awakened by a noise, a soft thump against the cabin's wall. My heart raced as I sat up, the fire reduced to glowing embers. Mustering my courage, I picked up the flashlight and tiptoed toward the door. Each step felt heavy, as if the air had thickened around me. I opened the door, stepping out onto the porch, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but the tall trees pressed against the night sky. The rustling resumed, this time closer, sending shivers down my spine. I took a step off the porch when something in my peripheral vision caught my attention. A figure stood in the shadows under the trees, just beyond the reach of my light. My breath caught in my throat. It was human-shaped but oddly distorted, arms too long and limbs bent at unnatural angles. I blinked and it was gone. The unease I had felt earlier morphed into primal fear, and I stumbled back into the cabin, locking the door behind me, heart pounding. The walls felt closer now, as if they were confining me to the dark corners of my mind. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening intently for any sounds, convinced that something was out there, watching. Morning light filtered through the window, only slightly calming my nerves, although I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I tried to brush it off as fatigue, convincing myself it was just my imagination running wild in the isolation of the woods. I spent the day unpacking and exploring the surroundings, trying to get familiar with the land. As evening approached, I felt a peculiar sensation in the air, an electric charge that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. As I cooked dinner, the rustling returned. It happened again, louder this time, and I dashed outside, my heart pounding wildly. I scanned the trees, but again saw nothing. With every fiber of my being, I could feel a presence, a watcher hidden in the shadows. The days bled into one another, filled with unease. I avoided going out after dark, finding comfort only in the glow of the fireplace. Time warped in that secluded space until one night, I gathered enough courage to confront whatever was lurking outside. Armed with a flashlight and nothing but my determination, I stepped out into the oppressive darkness, heart throbbing in my chest. I called out, demanding the thing to show itself. Silence enveloped me, stretching into an eternity. I stumbled back towards the cabin, only to hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing behind me. Panic surged, and I sprinted inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. I leaned against the door, breathless and trembling. I could hear it then, scratching at the wood, nails against the surface, an insistent, scratching sound that sent chills down my spine. The air grew colder, and I felt a weight on my chest, like shadows pressing in on me from all sides. Suddenly, a loud bang jolted me from my frozen state. The door rattled violently, and I stumbled backward in fear, my flashlight flickering as if sensing the encroaching darkness. Whatever it was trying to get in. I bolted for the bedroom, knowing I had to barricade myself. I piled furniture against the door, my heart racing, pulse echoing in my ears. As I huddled in the corner, the scratching grew louder, intertwined with faint whispers that seemed to seep through the walls themselves, filling the space with dread. Hours passed in a haze of terror. Finally, exhausted and defeated, I closed my eyes, praying for the morning light to banish whatever haunted this place. When daylight finally broke, I opened my eyes to find the cabin silent. I cautiously moved away from my makeshift barricade and peered through the window. The woods were bathed in golden light, serene and untouched. Tentatively, I managed to get the courage to go outside. There were no signs of disturbance, the silence of the forest palpable. But unease remained, a gnawing sensation that my time here was not yet over. I spent one final night in the cabin, my senses on high alert. Just when I thought I could finally settle, the whispering returned, softer now, almost enticing. Both terrified and entranced, I listened closely. The whispers beckoned me, promising answers and revealing the secrets of the woods. In a trance, I found myself stepping outside again. The darkness had returned, engulfing everything in its embrace. The forest seemed to hum with a life of its own as I walked deeper into the trees, my heart filled with a mix of... The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the forest as I drove along a narrow dirt road, the crunch of gravel beneath my tires echoing in the quiet night. I was heading to my uncle's old cabin, a place he had left me in his will, far from the city lights and noise, promising isolation and peace. The long drive had been uneventful, with only the occasional flicker of wildlife crossing the road. As I pulled up to the cabin, an unsettling feeling washed over me. The trees surrounding it loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying eerily in the wind. I hesitated for a moment before grabbing my bags and stepping out of the car, the cool night air prickling my skin. The cabin was rustic, deeply embedded in the woods, its wooden frame weathered and aged, the front porch creaking slightly as I stepped onto it. Inside, the atmosphere was thick, as if the very air was laden with memories. Dust motes swirled in the beam of my flashlight as I surveyed the living room, where old furniture sat in silence, each piece bearing the weight of stories untold. A sense of nostalgia washed over me, mixed with an overwhelming urge to leave. In the quiet town of Eldridge, I spent most of my childhood between the pages of books and the shadows of the woods that lined our backyard. The woods were a realm of wonder and terror, a place filled with ancient trees whispering secrets and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. My friends and I often dared each other to venture deeper, to discover the hidden wonders of nature, but we were always stopped short by the stories our parents told us, tales of people who had gone missing and never returned. It was all just folklore, we laughed, but a nagging fear crept in the back of my mind every time I stepped into that dense thicket. It wasn't until the summer of '98 that those tales would transform from mere ghost stories into a chilling reality. I was 13 and annoyed by the immaturity of my younger siblings. They were always underfoot, demanding attention I was eager to escape. That's when I decided to explore the woods alone, driven by a whim to find the fabled hidden creek where no sibling had ever ventured. Armed with nothing but a small flashlight and a sense of adventure, I slipped into the thick underbrush at the break of dawn. The dappled sunlight pierced through the canopy, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor, a beautiful sight that made me forget the gloomy stories I had been told. I wandered deeper and deeper, listening to birds chirping and twigs snapping underfoot. Hours passed like minutes, and soon I found the creek, a gurgling, crystalline stream that sparkled in the sunlight. I felt a rush of triumph. This was my hidden paradise. As I knelt to touch the water, I felt the air around me change in uncomfortable stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. That's when I heard it, a faint sound at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. I paused, straining to catch the words, my heart racing. It felt as if the whisper was beckoning me, a secret call I could not ignore. Curiosity piqued. I looked around, but the woods were silent again. The chirping birds had ceased their songs. There was only the steady flow of the creek, a gentle reminder that I wasn't alone. Compelled by an unseen force, I followed the sound deeper into the woods. Each step took me further from the familiar, deeper into the heart of the forest, the trees closing in around me like watchful sentinels. I stumbled upon a clearing, the bright sunlight flooding in, illuminating what appeared to be an old, decrepit cabin. It was an odd sight, as if it had sprung from the earth itself, with vines crawling up its sides and the roof sagging under the weight of time. The whispering intensified, now coming from the cabin itself. Fear mingled with curiosity, but I was drawn in. I approached slowly, the wooden door creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of mold and decay. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that filtered through cracked panes. The cabin was eerily simple, filled with rusted furniture and fading photographs that lined the walls. But one photograph jolted me. It was a faded image of a woman, her eyes piercing and intense, the same whispering call emanating from her gaze. I felt my skin crawl. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut, echoing in the emptiness. Panic surged through me and I banged on the door, the sound reverberating back at me like thunder. The whispering became clearer now, a cacophony of hushed voices mingling into a horrid symphony that clawed at my nerves. I rushed to the windows, pressing my face against the grimy glass, only to find the forest had transformed. The trees were now grotesque shadows, their branches twisted like gnarled fingers reaching out to snatch me away. I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I realized I was not alone in the cabin. I could sense a presence lurking, watching me, waiting. Desperate, I searched the cabin for any means of escape. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a rusted knife tucked behind a loose floorboard. My heart raced. I was filled with a strange mix of fear and primal instinct for survival. I held the knife tightly, ready to confront whatever entity was haunting the place. The whispering crescendoed, and I knew they were realities of those who had come before me, trapped in this nightmare, trying to warn me, or perhaps they were relishing in the fear I felt. Just then, the air turned icy, and shadows began to form, taking shape in the deepest corners of the cabin. I could see their eyes now, dark hollows filled with despair and longing. They were the lost, twisted souls forever bound to this wretched place. A voice, low and gravelly, emerged from the shadows, reaching deep into my very being. "Join us," it hissed, a slithering echo that made my blood run cold. I stumbled back, the knife slipped from my grip, clattering on the wooden floor. In a sudden burst of madness, I lunged for the door, pounding against it with my fists, screaming for freedom. In that moment of desperation, the door swung open, as if released from a great weight. I didn't question my fortune. I bolted out into the forest, the whispers chasing me, clawing at my back, desperate to pull me back into the dark. I ran until my lungs burned, until the sounds of the forest returned to their normal song, the sunlight bathing me in warmth and safety. But the experience haunted me, overshadowing my childhood. I never spoke of it, never ventured into those woods again. Years passed, and Eldridge evolved, the once innocent tales of folklore growing darker. I watched as the town changed around me, the woods being chopped down to make way for new houses and stores. The cabin remained hidden, covered by the encroaching branches, and as I drove past the last remnants of forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows I encountered that day squirmed beneath the surface, waiting for another soul to wander in, drawn by the whispers of the lost. Sometimes in the stillness of the night, I still hear those whispers, reminding me of the thin veil between our world and whatever lies beyond. I wonder if the souls within the woods still seek to add to their number, and I remind myself to share my story, not just as a warning, but as a lament for the lost, forever bound to their fate, merely waiting for someone else to follow their call. I remember the day I moved into my grandmother's old house, a creaky relic tucked away in a secluded part of town where the trees loomed overhead like ancient guardians. The air was thick with a strange aroma, a blend of dust and something else I couldn't quite place. Yet a sense of nostalgia clung to the walls like spider silk. I had inherited the property after her passing, and while my friends warned me about the odd tales that surrounded it, I shrugged them off, thinking they were just stories meant to scare children. But one night, beneath a sky shrouded in heavy clouds, the house began to reveal its secrets. I was unpacking boxes in the dim light of a single bulb that swung lazily from the ceiling when I heard the first whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the aged wooden shutters, but the voice was too distinct, too intentional. It seemed to call my name, soft and beckoning. Reluctantly, I set down the faded photograph I had been studying and followed the sound through the dim hallway, its chill wrapping around me like a forgotten memory. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each step echoing in the stale silence, until I found myself standing in front of the door that led to the cellar, something I had been warned about but had ignored out of sheer curiosity. The whispers intensified, swirling like mist around me, urging me on. With a trembling hand, I gripped the cold iron handle, half expecting to hear a voice shout for me to stop. Yet I was met with silence as I pushed the door open, the air rushing out like a sigh from the depths below. As I descended the narrow staircase, the light from above dwindled, swallowed by the darkness, and with a flick of the switch, the bulb flickered to life, revealing the cobweb corners and the dust-covered crates sealed tight. But it wasn't the remnants of a forgotten life that drew my gaze. It was the mirror on the far wall, an ornate, gilded thing that looked out of place amidst the musty surroundings. As I approached, I felt a strange compulsion pulling me closer, my reflection wavering like water disturbed by a pebble. But it wasn't just my reflection I saw. Behind me, standing in the shadow of the staircase, was a figure, indistinct yet decidedly human. But when I turned to confront whatever was there, I found nothing but the chilling embrace of an empty room. Unease crawled up my spine as I faced the mirror again, feeling a weight settle on my chest. My reflection looked back at me with a vacant stare, but then, as if drawn by an unseen force, the figure emerged again in the corner of the mirror's glass, pale and gaunt, with sunken eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow. Panic surged through me as I turned once more. The room unchanged. There was no one there, but the air grew heavy, thickening with a palpable dread as I stumbled backward, bumping into the crates behind me and knocking one over. The wood splintered, spilling its contents onto the floor, old letters, photographs, and relics of a life I had never known. I picked up a photograph of my grandmother, young and vibrant, yet something was off. In the background of the picture, half obscured by shadows, stood the gaunt figure again. I dropped the photo, heart racing, and looked back at the mirror, but there was no sign of the figure, only my shaken reflection staring wide-eyed at the abyss behind me. It was then that I noticed a soft tapping sound, rhythmic and distant, echoing from deep within the cellar. Compelled by something darker than fear, I moved toward the sound, each tap resonating in my chest like a drumbeat, leading me deeper into the cellar's shadows. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if something was trying to break through the walls of time and space, desperate to be heard. I stumbled upon an old writing desk tucked in the corner, its surface marred by years of neglect. The tapping seemed to emanate from within its drawers. I pulled one open, hard hammering, revealing a stack of journals filled with my grandmother's neat handwriting, recounting her life, her joys, and her fears, but woven through the pages were tales of her encounters with the spirit, the figure in the mirror. She wrote of how it had haunted her for years, even before I was born, whispering secrets in the dead of night, begging her to release it from whatever curse bound it to this world. My hand shook as I flipped through the pages. I remember the day I moved into my grandmother's old house, a creaky relic tucked away in a secluded part of town where the trees loomed overhead like ancient guardians. The air was thick with a strange aroma, a blend of dust and something else I couldn't quite place. Yet a sense of nostalgia clung to the walls like spider silk. I had inherited the property after her passing, and while my friends warned me about the odd tales that surrounded it, I shrugged them off, thinking they were just stories meant to scare children. But one night, beneath a sky shrouded in heavy clouds, the house began to reveal its secrets. I was unpacking boxes in the dim light of a single bulb that swung lazily from the ceiling when I heard the first whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the aged wooden shutters, but the voice was too distinct, too intentional. It seemed to call my name, soft and beckoning. Reluctantly, I set down the faded photograph I had been studying and followed the sound through the dim hallway, its chill wrapping around me like a forgotten memory. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each step echoing in the stale silence, until I found myself standing in front of the door that led to the cellar, something I had been warned about but had ignored out of sheer curiosity. The whispers intensified, swirling like mist around me, urging me on. With a trembling hand, I gripped the cold iron handle, half expecting to hear a voice shout for me to stop. Yet I was met with silence as I pushed the door open, the air rushing out like a sigh from the depths below. As I descended the narrow staircase, the light from above dwindled, swallowed by the darkness, and with a flick of the switch, the bulb flickered to life, revealing the cobweb corners and the dust-covered crates sealed tight. But it wasn't the remnants of a forgotten life that drew my gaze. It was the mirror on the far wall, an ornate, gilded thing that looked out of place amidst the musty surroundings. As I approached, I felt a strange compulsion pulling me closer, my reflection wavering like water disturbed by a pebble. But it wasn't just my reflection I saw. Behind me, standing in the shadow of the staircase, was a figure, indistinct yet decidedly human. But when I turned to confront whatever was there, I found nothing but the chilling embrace of an empty room. Unease crawled up my spine as I faced the mirror again, feeling a weight settle on my chest. My reflection looked back at me with a vacant stare, but then, as if drawn by an unseen force, the figure emerged again in the corner of the mirror's glass, pale and gaunt, with sunken eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow. Panic surged through me as I turned once more. The rain beat down relentlessly that night, matching the rhythm of my pounding heart. I had driven for hours, escaping the bustling city and the suffocating memories that haunted me. I thought a weekend getaway to the mountains would clear my mind. As I pulled into the rickety cabin, a chill ran down my spine, though the air was warm. The place was isolated, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. I shrugged off the eerie feeling and stepped inside, the wooden door creaking like it had seen better days. The interior was rustic but charming, with a stone fireplace and a worn-out couch that looked inviting even if its fabric was faded. I lit a fire, hoping the crackling flames would soothe my restless thoughts. That evening, I settled into a routine, a simple dinner, a glass of wine, and a worn book I had brought along. Hours slipped away, enveloped by shadows and the occasional rustle outside. But eventually, fatigue tugged at my eyelids, and I decided to call it a night. I made my way to the bedroom, a small, dimly lit space with just a bed and a window looking out into the impending darkness outside. I pulled the quilt over me and closed my eyes, but sleep eluded me. The wind howled through the trees, and I swore I heard whispers floating on the air. Dismissing it as my imagination, I tried to focus on nothing but sleep. Just as I began to drift off, a loud thump against the cabin jolted me awake. I sat up, heart racing, straining to hear. Silence settled, heavy and smothering. I was about to convince myself it was nothing when another loud noise echoed upstairs, like footsteps on the floorboards. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone, but the battery was nearly dead. I could barely make out a shadow moving in the beam of light from the dying fire. My rational mind raced through explanations. Perhaps a creature had wandered inside, or maybe it was just the house settling. I convinced myself to investigate, pushing aside sheer terror. Cautiously, I crept toward the stairs, each creak of the floor echoing in the stillness. I reached the bottom of the staircase, peering up into the darkness above. My heart pounded like a drum, but curiosity compelled me forward. I reached for a flashlight I always kept in my bag, flicking it on and pointing it towards the stairs. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing every splintered step, every dust-coated surface, but revealing nothing more. I took a deep breath and began to ascend the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I reached the landing, a sudden gust of wind slammed the front door shut, causing me to jump. I gathered my courage and walked down the hallway, sending the light of the flashlight bouncing off the walls. The house felt alive in that moment, as if it was holding its breath. I reached the door to the attic, my gut churning with dread. It was slightly ajar, the handle cold to touch. I pushed it open, revealing a musty room filled with old furniture draped in sheets, like ghosts waiting to be unveiled. I shone the light around, my fingers trembling as I stepped inside. Cobwebs hung from the rafters, and dust danced in the narrow beam of the flashlight. But then, in the corner, I saw it, a figure standing still, partially obscured by shadows, seemingly watching me. I froze, breath hitching in my throat. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. The figure remained motionless, and panic coursed through my veins. Slowly, I stepped back, only to hear the sound of soft, deliberate footsteps following me, each step echoing in the confined space. I whipped around, shining the light towards the figure, but in that instant, whatever it was had vanished. I stumbled back, bumping into a dusty bookshelf, sending books crashing to the ground. My heart raced, and the primal instinct to flee took over. I dashed down the stairs, nearly losing my footing. I bolted for the door when suddenly, something cold brushed against my neck. I screamed and whipped around, but there was nothing there. I burst out into the rainy night, gasping for breath, and sprinted toward my car parked under an old tree. I jumped inside, fumbling with my keys, heart racing as the engine roared to life. I didn't look back, not even once, as I tore down the gravel road leading away from the cabin. I just wanted to escape whatever dark presence had evaded me in the shadows. Hours went by as I drove, the world outside blurring into nothing but dark shapes and heavy rain. I finally pulled into a diner, desperate for comfort, my hands still shaking uncontrollably. As I stepped inside, the warmth greeted me and the smell of coffee filled the air. It was busy, a contrast to the haunting solitude of the cabin. I sat down in a booth, ordering a cup of coffee, trying to calm my swirling thoughts. An old man at the counter glanced over, his expression unreadable. Suddenly, he spoke, his voice gravelly. "You shouldn't have gone there." I looked up sharply, my heart dropping. "What do you mean?" The diner fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. "That cabin, it's not what it seems. It has a history." My stomach nodded, and I felt the blood drain from my face. He continued, "People have gone missing in those woods. They say something still roams those halls, something that feeds on fear." I swallowed hard, the coffee suddenly tasting bitter on my tongue. "What do you mean?" I questioned, feeling both intrigued and terrified. "Every few years, it claims another victim. You're lucky to have escaped." My breath quickened, the weight of his words crashing down on me. The figure in the attic flashed before my eyes, and I almost choked on my coffee. But I heard footsteps. I felt cold. I thought it was just in my mind. He shook his head, eyes piercing mine. "Once you feel it, it never leaves you. You have to go back and confront it." The rain beat down relentlessly that night, matching the rhythm of my pounding heart. I had driven for hours, escaping the bustling city and the suffocating memories that haunted me. I thought a weekend getaway to the mountains would clear my mind. As I pulled into the rickety cabin, a chill ran down my spine, though the air was warm. The place was isolated, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. I shrugged off the eerie feeling and stepped inside, the wooden door creaking like it had seen better days. The interior was rustic but charming, with a stone fireplace and a worn-out couch that looked inviting even if its fabric was faded. I lit a fire, hoping the crackling flames would soothe my restless thoughts. That evening, I settled into a routine, a simple dinner, a glass of wine, and a worn book I had brought along. Hours slipped away, enveloped by shadows and the occasional rustle outside. But eventually, fatigue tugged at my eyelids, and I decided to call it a night. I made my way to the bedroom, a small, dimly lit space with just a bed and a window looking out into the impending darkness outside. I pulled the quilt over me and closed my eyes, but sleep eluded me. The wind howled through the trees, and I swore I heard whispers floating on the air. Dismissing it as my imagination, I tried to focus on nothing but sleep. Just as I began to drift off, a loud thump against the cabin jolted me awake. I sat up, heart racing, straining to hear. Silence settled, heavy and smothering. I was about to convince myself it was nothing when another loud noise echoed upstairs, like footsteps on the floorboards. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone, but the battery was nearly dead. I could barely make out a shadow moving in the beam of light from the dying fire. My rational mind raced through explanations. Perhaps a creature had wandered inside, or maybe it was just the house settling. I convinced myself to investigate, pushing aside sheer terror. Cautiously, I crept toward the stairs, each creak of the floor echoing in the stillness. I reached the bottom of the staircase, peering up into the darkness above. My heart pounded like a drum, but curiosity compelled me forward. I reached for a flashlight. The eeriness of that old house had always fascinated me. It loomed at the end of our street, shrouded by tall, overgrown trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. The neighbors said it had been abandoned for decades, but I could never shake the feeling that it was more than just an empty shell. My friends dared me to go inside, and their teasing ignited a curiosity in me that I couldn't ignore. One stormy evening, when the rain lashed against windows and the wind howled like a wounded animal, I found myself standing at the peeling front door, heart racing, breath hitching. The door creaked open with the slightest push, revealing a dark, musty interior filled with dust motes dancing in the scant light that managed to creep in through the cracked windows. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam slicing through the gloom, illuminating cobwebs that hung like curtains in doorways. Each step echoed around me, amplifying my nervous heartbeat. The air was thick and stale, carrying the scent of mold and decay, but I pressed on. My fingers brushed against the walls, feeling the rough, aged texture of the plaster. I ventured deeper into the house, exploring room after room filled with rotting furniture and remnants of lives once lived. An old photograph caught my eye, a family portrait, dulled with age, with eyes that seemed to follow me. An uneasy chill settled in my spine, and I quickly averted my gaze, hastening through the narrow hallways. I reached a door at the end of a corridor, its surface marred by time. With a hesitant push, I opened it and found myself in a small study. Dusty books lined the shelves, the only hint of life amid the decay. An ancient typewriter sat forlornly on a desk, as if waiting for a hand to resurrect its purpose. I felt a strange pull toward it and approached, running my fingers over the keys. Suddenly, an odd chill swept through the room, causing the hair on the back of my neck to prickle. The typewriter clicked loudly, thoroughly out of place in the silence, as if someone were typing without a body. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, crashing into a bookshelf, causing books to tumble to the floor. My breath quickened, and I started to retreat when I noticed words had begun to form on a blank sheet of paper in the typewriter. I squinted in disbelief, reading the words as they materialized. "You shouldn't have come here." A heavy dread settled over me, and I turned to flee, sprinting back through the house. The dark corridors seemed to twist, elongate, and the shadows lengthened, as if they were reaching for me. I slammed through the front door and stumbled into the rain-soaked yard, gasping for air. But my heart didn't stop racing even as I put distance between myself and that accursed house. Days passed, but I couldn't rid myself of the experience. Sleepless nights turned into obsessive thoughts of the house, the typewriter, and that ominous warning. I confided in my best friend, hoping he might help clear my head, but I could see the flicker of fear in his eyes when I recounted my tale. He scoffed and said I was just spooked, but something shifted in him, and our playful camaraderie felt altered. I decided to return to the house, armed this time with confidence and a camera. I wanted to capture proof of the supernatural assist I had claimed. My plan solidified as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard. The air felt different, charged with an unspoken tension. I entered with a sense of purpose, the flashlight illuminating the dark corners, still hauntingly familiar. The study called to me again. As I stepped inside, the typewriter lay dormant, but the air felt thick, almost electric. I approached, snapping photos as I moved. Suddenly, the typewriter clattered to life, each key striking in rapid succession. I gasped, raising my camera to document it. My breath hitched as the paper began to fill again. This time the words were pleading, "Help me, please." An icy grip wrapped around my heart. I was paralyzed, frozen in place as the typewriter continued, spitting out frenzied lines that begged for salvation. I dropped the camera, my knees weak as dread washed over me. With the last of my will, I tore myself away, racing through the darkness toward freedom, the voice of the typewriter echoing in my mind, "Help me." Days turned to weeks, haunted by that insistent plea and warped longing that felt too real to dismiss. I grew consumed by it, losing weight, sleep, and sanity. I sought out the history behind the house, scouring libraries, searching for any mention of those who lived there. I uncovered a ghost story tied intricately to the home, a tale of a writer who vanished without a trace, consumed by his own work that spiraled into an abyss of despair. The words he had typed filled a book that had never seen light, unread and unbound, left to rot in the confines of that curse. A newfound determination kindled in me. I began to write, pouring my anguish and obsession into a story that mirrored his plight, filling the void inside me with characters who could escape where he had failed. I worked tirelessly, night after night, driven by inspiration that flowed through my fingertips as if his spirit guided me. Finally, the script was complete, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows flitted at the edge of my vision, and whispers echoed in the corridors of my mind. The night I sent my manuscript to publishers, I sat in my bedroom, heart pounding as I felt a presence settle around me. The typewriter I'd found in that study had become a part of my creative process, and it sat in the corner, lifeless. But tonight, it sprang to life, clicking and clacking, forming words on its own. I trembled, fear wresting control from my reason as I crept towards it. The paper read, "Thank you." Cold realization washed over me, and as the last word printed, the lights flickered out, plunging me into darkness, and everything I had become ebbed away into the shadows. The manuscript won awards, success and accolades flooded in, but my mind and spirit lay shattered, ensnared by whatever force had drawn me into that cursed tale. I had helped him escape, but in doing so, I had lost myself, like those who had come before, forever bound to the house, now an empty vessel haunting the echoes of a typewriter long forgotten. It started on a humid August night, the kind where the heat clings to your skin like an unwanted touch. I had just moved into a cramped apartment in a forgotten part of town after a messy breakup. The walls were thin, the neighbors loud, and the smell of mildew lingered in the air, but it was cheap and solitary. I figured it was just another chapter in my life, another way to reclaim my independence. Little did I know that the apartment held a dark secret, one that would twist my perception of reality. The first week passed uneventfully, the noise of city life outside drowning out my thoughts. I unpacked my boxes, setting up my meager belongings, trying to make this place feel like home. But each night, as I lay in my small bed, the darkness felt thicker than normal. It wasn't just the lack of light. It felt like something else was lurking within it, something that watched and waited. It began with whispers, quiet at first, but unmistakable. I kept telling myself it was the old pipes, or perhaps my imagination running wild due to the silence that swallowed me whole. As a skeptic, I dismissed the odd sounds. After all, the world is filled with creaks and groans. Everything changed when I noticed the scratches on the wall across from my bed. They were faint at first, almost like someone had clawed at the plaster, but each morning I would wake to find them deeper, longer, and more defined. Each day I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks, perhaps an effect of my own anxiety. Yet, as the marks grew, I could feel an unseen presence weaving itself through the fabric of my day-to-day life, and an unshakable tension began to creep into my mind. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to venture into the small hallway that connected my apartment to the others. The air felt colder, and as I stood there, I could hear soft thuds, like footsteps, echoing from somewhere above. Each time they resonated, my heart raced, a creeping realization washing over me. I was utterly alone. I called out into the dark, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered, and I turned to head back when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow flit across the wall. It was quick, barely perceptible, yet palpable enough to make my skin prickle. I stood frozen, breath hitching in my throat. Was this fear gripping me, or was something genuinely out there? The next night, I finally decided to confront this fear. Dismissing the gnawing sensation in my gut, I set up my old camera to capture whatever was haunting me. The lens blinked red, and I whispered a challenge into the dark, inviting whatever was lurking to show itself. Hours passed in silence, the camera recording the mundane night until suddenly, I heard it, a soft voice shushing me, hushed and raspy, like ash scraping against metal. I glanced around frantically, but all I saw was stillness, thick and palpable. I checked the footage, heart pounding, only to find static, nothing but a distortion of the empty room. With each passing day, the scratching continued, now accompanied by soft whispers that seemed to float through the air like autumn leaves caught in a breeze. I barely touched my belongings, consumed by a growing paranoia. Friends began to notice the change in me. I grew distant, haunted by sleepless nights spent trying to decipher those horrible sounds. They expressed concern, suggesting I seek help, but who would believe me? Who would understand that I was losing my grip on reality? Desperation blurred the lines between what was real and what was a figment of my imagination. In a fit of insanity, I decided to confront the source of the murmurs directly. I placed my palm against the scrawled marks on the wall, hoping to feel something, some sort of connection. I whispered an apology, as if somehow I had trespassed in this space. That's when the whispers escalated, rising in pitch until they became a cacophony of unintelligible sounds, and pain surged through my palm as if the wall itself was alive, rejecting my touch. I stumbled backward, a scream escaping my lips, but the sounds only intensified, drowning me in their fury. That it came to a climax one fateful night, with the moon hanging heavy in the sky. I lay wide awake, heart thundering, when the scratching began again. This time, it was different. The noise morphed into frantic scratching, a banging as though someone, or something, was desperate to break free from the wall itself. I felt madness inching closer, the air crackling with tension. Gripped by fear and compulsion, I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox, unable to fight the instinct tugging at me to break the wall open. I swung the hammer with all my might, and the wall shattered, dust filling the air like the ghosts of forgotten memories. What lay inside was not what I expected. It was an empty void, dark, consuming, and seemingly endless. Yet in that blackness, I could make out outlines of objects long forgotten, remnants of lives that had tread this space before me. I could see faces, distorted and anguished, and I realized with a chilling clarity that these weren't just ghosts. They were trapped souls who had become one with this place. I staggered back as icy tendrils of fear encircled my heart. What had I unleashed in my desperate curiosity? From the void, the whispers exploded into a cacophony, voices screaming, pleading, and I felt something rush past me. I tried to seal the opening, but it was too late that I fled the apartment, the air thick with resentment and sorrow as I left that damned place behind. The following days were a blur, filled with the bedraggled aftermath of my actions. I never returned to that apartment, nor did I dare to explain to anyone what had transpired. But sometimes, late at night, when the world settles into its uneasy slumber, I hear whispered voices drifting on the breeze, cold and familiar, reminding me that some doors should never be opened and some spirits should never be disturbed. It all began one dreary evening when the autumn leaves fell like whispers from the trees, swirling around my feet as I walked home from a friend's house. I lived in a small, isolated town nestled between dark woods and a sprawling lake that mirrored the dense, oppressive sky. The breeze carried a chill that settled into my bones, as if the very air was warning me. I shrugged it off and kept moving, convinced that my mind was just playing tricks on me after a long night of ghost stories. As I approached my house, I noticed a flickering light coming from the woods. I paused, squinting into the darkness, my heart rate quickening. It was just a firefly, I thought, but the brightness seemed too constant, too organized. My curiosity got the better of me, and despite the nagging feeling in my gut, I stepped off the well-worn path and headed toward the woods. The trees loomed over me, their gnarled branches stretching out like skeletal fingers, and I pushed through the underbrush, each crackle underfoot compounding my unease. When I reached the clearing, I was met with an unexpected sight, a campfire, its flames dancing fiercely against the encroaching night. Around the fire sat a circle of people, their faces obscured by shadow, their laughter echoing eerily through the trees. Something felt off. It wasn't just the isolation of the moment, but the way their laughter seemed to resonate in my chest, almost as if it was pulling me closer. I stood at the edge of the clearing, hesitant but drawn in by the warmth of the fire against the cold night. Then I heard it, an ominous hum, weaving in and out of the laughter, something that didn't quite match the revelry around me. A woman broke from the group, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes locked. There was something in her gaze, a mix of fear and urgency, as if she was silently pleading for me to turn back. I hesitated, but the curious part of me insisted on staying a little longer. I crept closer, inching into the illumination of the fire, the shadows dancing wildly at my feet. Suddenly, the laughter stopped, and the entire group turned to face me. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I realized they were wearing masks, thick, grotesque caricatures that made their faces seem almost otherworldly. Panic surged through me, and I stepped backward instinctively. "Join us," one of them shouted cheerfully, the mask making their voice sound distorted, almost unnatural. But all I could feel was dread coursing through my veins. Before I could respond, another masked figure lunged forward, grabbing my arm with a grip that felt icy and unyielding. "Stay," they insisted, and despite my instinct to flee, I found myself paralyzed by their gaze, inexplicably trapped. The faces around the fire morphed from cheerful to something more sinister, the laughter now replaced with discordant mumbling. The shadows twisting like dark beings celebrating some unfathomable ritual. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was ensnared in a web of fear and confusion, the hum growing louder, vibrating through me. The campfire crackled and popped, flames licking the night sky as they began to chant. I couldn't make out the words, but the language felt ancient, alive, as if it held the power to summon something from the depths of the earth. The woman's desperate look flashed through my mind again. I needed to escape. Taking advantage of their momentary distraction, I pulled myself free and bolted toward the trees. Branches clawed at my arms, and underbrush snagged at my shoes, but I pushed forward, the hum of their chanting fading behind me. I ran, not looking back, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I finally emerged onto a path, the familiar one that led home. As I stumbled through my front door, breathless and trembling, I thought I was safe. I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto the floor, trying to process what had just happened. But as night deepened, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was still being watched. The shadows in my house seemed to twist more than usual, curling around the corners like dark tendrils. The next morning, the town seemed unchanged, blissfully unaware of the horror that had unfolded just beyond the trees. But I knew better. Over the following weeks, I experienced strange visions, dreams of those masked figures, their eyes piercing through the darkness. I could hear their chants echoing in my mind, a constant reminder of the otherworldly pull they had on me. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me again. I returned to the clearing, armed with a flashlight and a determination to confront whatever had haunted me. But when I arrived, there was no campfire, no evidence that anyone had been there. Only silence. I felt a chilling realization wash over me. What if I never truly left? That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the humming return, a haunting melody weaving through my thoughts, growing progressively louder. I tried to block it out, but it seeped into my dreams. I found myself standing in the clearing again, the circle of figures before me. Their laughter echoed, but this time it was welcoming, drawing me into a dance I couldn't refuse. Days turned into weeks, each moment more dread-filled than the last, until my connection to the real world began to fray. I told no one about the creeping madness that clawed at the edges of my mind. Then came the final night. The last shred of my will broke as I stood outside, the clearing illuminated under a pale moon, the masked figures beckoning me forward, the hum enveloping me. Soothing and sinister all at once. As I crossed that invisible line back into the world of the lost, I felt the last vestiges of my humanity slip away, replaced by something darker, more primal. I could finally understand the chant, my voice seamlessly blending with theirs as I joined the eternal dance, draped in shadows, forever part of the laughter echoing within the woods, forever haunted by the home I could never return to. I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural, dismissing the tales spun by my grandmother as mere folklore meant to scare children into behaving. But everything changed the summer I turned 18, a season forever etched in my memory and shadowed by events I can hardly recount without a chill creeping up my spine. My family had decided to renovate our old house, a creaky Victorian inherited from my great-aunt Matilda, known for her eccentricities and unyielding belief in the unseen. We'd spent countless weekends there, scrubbing away decades of dust, peeling back layers of wallpaper, and discovering odd trinkets she'd left behind. It was during those days that I first started to sense something was off. It was subtle at first, a fleeting shadow, a whisper caught on the breeze, or the unsettling feeling of being watched when alone in the dimly lit corridors. I shrugged it off as my imagination running wild, fueled by the stories I had heard as a child. However, things escalated as the renovations progressed. One night, while my parents were busy discussing paint colors in the living room, I decided to explore the attic alone. Climbing the rickety stairs, the air grew colder with each step, the darkness enveloping me like a thick fog. The attic had always fascinated me. It was filled with ancient furniture, cobwebs clinging to the corners, and boxes that contained forgotten memories. As I began rummaging through the boxes, a strange sensation washed over me, like someone was standing right behind me. I turned suddenly, but no one was there. My heart raced, and I chalked it up to nerves. I was about to leave when I noticed a small, ornate box tucked away behind an old trunk. It was locked, but that only piqued my curiosity. After a struggle, I managed to pry it open, revealing a collection of yellowed letters and black and white photographs. The pictures depicted a woman in vintage clothing, her eyes always hauntingly fixed on the camera, and I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stared into those ghostly orbs. Each letter was addressed to someone named Thomas, discussing love, loss, and a promise made long ago. The last letter, however, sent chills coursing through my body. It spoke of a pact with the spirits of the house, a warning of impending doom should the promise not be fulfilled. Confused and frightened, I tucked everything back into the box and left the attic, the unsettling feeling still lingering with me. Over the next few days, peculiar incidents began to unfold. Objects went missing only to reappear in strange places, and whispers echoed through empty rooms. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced I heard my name being called. Then one evening, as I lay in bed, I felt a cold gust sweep through my room, sending a tremor of fear through me. I bolted upright, scanning the darkness, and that's when I saw her, the woman from the photographs, standing at the foot of my bed, her face a mix of sorrow and desperation. I was frozen, unable to speak as her hollow gaze pierced through me. A multitude of emotions surged within me, fear, pity, confusion, but just as quickly as she appeared, she faded into the shadows. The next morning, I felt an overwhelming urge to learn more about the woman. I combed through local archives and old newspapers, discovering that she was Matilda's sister, Isabella, who had mysteriously vanished decades ago. The rumors indicated she had fallen in love with a man named Thomas, and upon learning of a grave family secret, She had been warned never to return. As I pieced together the fragments of her story, I felt an undeniable connection to her spirit, as if she were trying to communicate something vital. I shared my findings with my parents, who initially dismissed my concerns as the musings of an overactive imagination. But when strange occurrences intensified, like the lights flickering uncontrollably and cold spots spreading through the house, we began to take my fears seriously. One stormy evening, while huddled together in the living room, we heard a loud crash from the attic. My father reluctantly agreed to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and trembling with apprehension, he climbed the stairs, and we all held our breath, hoping he wouldn't find anything too unsettling. After what felt like an eternity, he called down to us, his voice quaking. When he emerged, he carried the old box I had found, the letters spilling out as if they had a life of their own. In that moment, we realized the depth of Isabella's torment. We decided it was time to confront the lingering spirit once and for all. That weekend, under the glow of a candlelit seance, we gathered in the living room and recited the words from the letters. I closed my eyes and concentrated, channeling my energy into reaching Isabella. Suddenly, the air thickened and a chilling wind whirled around us, extinguishing the candles, plunging us into darkness. I felt her presence stronger than ever, a palpable energy that throbbed in the air. "Isabella," I called out softly, "we're here to help you." A low moan filled the room, and I felt overwhelming sadness. "Find Thomas." A voice echoed softly. Was it mine or hers? We needed to uncover what happened to him, the missing piece of her tragic story. The following days were spent researching Thomas, and eventually, we uncovered his grave on the outskirts of town, an unmarked stone barely visible among overgrown weeds. We visited it as a family, standing united amidst the twilight glow. As we laid a bouquet of flowers there, I felt the air around us shift, a sense of release washing over me. There, beneath the worn inscription, I whispered the promises of love and remembrance, and suddenly, the oppressive weight that had hung over our house lifted. For the first time in weeks, the atmosphere felt light, as if Isabella had finally found peace. That night, as I turned in, I saw her one last time, her expression serene, a gentle smile gracing her lips as she whispered a soft thank you before dissolving into a cascade of shimmering lights. The house felt different afterward. The whispers faded, the shadows receded, and the once chilly air warmed. I learned that sometimes the ghosts of the past linger because they are seeking resolution and understanding. Isabella was not the only spirit tied to the stories of our family, but she was the first one to teach me that love, even when it leads to heartache, is a powerful force that transcends time and space. Though I still reflect on that fateful summer with a mixture of fear and awe, I emerged from that experience changed, more open to the mysteries of the world, believing in the bonds that connect us, even beyond death. I always thought horror was something that existed solely in books or movies, a realm of fantasy far removed from the mundane reality of everyday life. I was wrong. It all started during my final semester of college when I accepted an internship at a small, nearly abandoned newspaper office in a rural town. The building was a relic of the past, with peeling paint, dusty windows, and an eerie quiet that seemed to wrap around it like a heavy fog. I was excited, eager to prove my worth and make a mark, but from the moment I stepped inside, I felt a strange sense of unease. The staff was sparse, an old editor who spent most of his days barricaded behind piles of yellowing paper, and a couple of journalists who seemed to share a collective disdain for the place. They often whispered amongst themselves, casting wary glances toward the back of the office where I was stationed. When I asked them about it, they would shake their heads and change the subject, a nervous tension lingering in the air. It wasn't long before I noticed strange occurrences. It began subtly. Files would go missing, only to reappear in the most unlikely places. I wrote it off as workplace chaos until one evening, while the others had gone home, I heard faint whispers echoing through the empty hallways, like shadows of conversations trapped in time. I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. Then came the nights when I stayed late. The building creaked and groaned, the sound of old wood settling, or so I thought. But on one particular night, as I sifted through old articles about the town's history, I stumbled upon a series of reports about a local family who had disappeared years ago, under mysterious circumstances that were never solved. As I read deeper, I found an unsettling detail. The last known location of the family was the very spot where my office now stood. Chills ran down my spine as I read about their final moments, a description of their home, detailed enough to paint a picture of the exact feeling I felt each time I crossed the threshold of my workplace. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. That night, as I left, I decided to take the back exit, and it was there that I saw it. A shadow, darker than night, flitting between the trees bordering the office. I instinctively froze, heart racing, and then it was gone. I convinced myself it was just a deer or trick of the light, but deep down, I knew something was off. The following days only grew stranger. The whispers grew louder, no longer mere echoes, but full conversations that danced just out of reach. Paranoia crept in like smoke, suffocating and inescapable. I started taking notes on what I experienced, rationalizing this bizarre behavior as a way to cope, but the notes, every fragmented thought, seemed to take on a life of their own. Every morning, I would find them arranged in a different order, or sometimes entire passages missing, as if something or someone was rewriting my thoughts before I could even understand them. My dreams became nightmares steeped in horror, visions of the family that vanished, their faces twisted with fear, pleading silently for me to uncover the truth. I confided in my supervisor, but he simply laughed it off, said it was just the stress of the job, but I saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. He warned me to be careful, to keep my distance from the stories that were better left forgotten. With every passing day, the looming presence in the office grew heavier. I started to notice the way people avoided the back room, an area filled with outdated files that contained the darkest secrets of our town. Driven by morbid curiosity, I dared to venture back there one night, fueled by the need to know why this place felt alive yet dead. As I shuffled through the dusty files, I felt a chill sweep through the room. And that's when it happened. An intense, sharp pain shot through my arm. I turned to see a shadowy figure standing just beyond the threshold, its face obscured yet resolute, eyes piercing through the clutter. Panic surged through me, drowning out all rational thought, and I bolted toward the door. The shadow didn't move, didn't chase after me. It simply stood there as I fled, but I could feel its eyes boring into my back, assessing me like prey. In the days that followed, my thoughts turned darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that the office was more than just an old newspaper. It was a trap, a collector of souls drawn in by the allure of past stories. I began losing track of time, days blending into nights, and every so often, I would find myself inexplicably standing in front of the back room, the shadows whispering of secrets I wasn't meant to hear. Each time, I was left with a feeling of dread, a gnawing understanding that I was being watched by something ancient and hungry. It was then that I realized I had to leave this place. It wasn't just affecting my mind, but my very soul. On my final night, I gathered my things and walked toward the exit, each step heavier than the last, as if the shadows were reaching out to pull me back. Just before I crossed the threshold, I heard a voice, soft, almost kind, inviting yet filled with despair. "Stay with us," it echoed, reverberating through the foundations of the old building. Fear paralyzed me. I paused for what felt like an eternity, torn between the dark pull of the unknown and the promise of freedom outside. Just as I stepped out into the crisp night air, I felt a rush behind me, a gust that whispered through my hair. I never looked back. To this day, I wonder about the stories left untold within those walls. The whispers still haunt me, a reminder that horror isn't just a reflection of fear, but a living entity feeding on the past, waiting for someone to breathe life into its forgotten tales. Sometimes, I can still hear it calling, urging me to return, but I refuse to answer. I know better now. Some stories are meant to remain buried, sealed in shadows where they belong. As I reflect on that night, an unsettling chill still crawls down my spine. It was supposed to be a routine evening, an ordinary drive home after work, with the sun setting slowly on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. I didn't mind the isolation of the back roads. The familiarity was comforting, or so I thought. These paths wound through dense woods, each bend cloaked in shadows, hinting at the secrets they held. The radio played softly. The hum of the engine created a soothing soundtrack to my drive. Suddenly, my headlights caught a glimpse of something out of the ordinary. a figure standing just off the edge of the road, half hidden by the trees. I slowed down, my heart pounding in my chest, drawn in by a mix of curiosity and dread. The figure was a woman, her clothes tattered and dirt-stained. She looked lost, her hair unkempt and wild, face streaked with what appeared to be tears or grime. I hesitated for only a moment, my instincts battling with the urge to help. "Are you okay?" I yelled through the open window, my voice shaking slightly. She turned her head slowly, her gaze locking onto mine, and I was struck by the emptiness in her eyes. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of my engine. Without thinking, I opened the door and stepped out, immediately feeling the cold bite of the evening air. My instincts warned me to turn back, but compassion pushed me forward. "What happened?" I asked, taking a cautious step closer. Instead of answering, she took a step back, glancing nervously over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to emerge from the darkness behind her. "They're coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, panic rising in her tone. I could feel a shiver of fear creeping up my spine as she repeated the words. "Who's coming?" I probed, my brow furrowing in concern. "You don't understand. You need to leave," she cried, her voice cracking. I glanced down the road, the twilight deepening into night. A sudden unease settled over me, but I couldn't leave her there alone. "Get in the car. I'll take you to safety," I urged, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the trees. "You don't know what's out there," she hissed, panic rising in her voice. I felt the tension in the air thicken, and I forced myself to remain calm. "Please, just get in. We can figure this out together." After what felt like an eternity, she finally relented and climbed into the passenger seat, glancing anxiously into the darkness surrounding us. I could feel her eyes on me, their intensity unnerving. As I began to drive, she stared out the window, breathing heavily, lost in a world of fear. "They're following us," she murmured, her voice trembling. My heart raced as I kept my gaze focused on the road. "Who's following us?" I pressed, still trying to understand the gravity of the situation. It's them. The ones who took me," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. "You must believe me. They won't stop until they find me, until they find us." The tension in the car escalated as I strained to keep us safe on the winding road. I could feel an unseen presence, heavy and oppressive, lurking just beyond the fragile barrier of my vehicle. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but only darkness stared back at me. "Why were they after you?" I finally asked, my voice steady but laced with fear. She took a deep breath, her hands wringing together. "They want to finish what they started. They think I know something." "Know what?" I pressed, my curiosity outweighing my fear. But before she could answer, the car jolted violently, the sound of metal scraping against metal causing my heart to drop. My headlights flickered and dimmed before abruptly cutting out, plunging us into darkness. Panic surged through me. "What just happened?" I gasped, fumbling to turn the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, refusing to cooperate. From the silence of the trees came a low, menacing growl, echoing like a haunting melody. I strained to hear over the pounding of my heart, but the darkness felt alive and aware. The woman's eyes widened in terror, and she clutched my arm with a grip like iron. "They're here. They found us," she screamed, her voice frantic. Just as I finally got the engine to roar back to life, I caught movement in the rearview mirror, a shadow darting from tree to tree, closing in on us faster than I could comprehend. I slammed down on the gas pedal, and the car lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. The headlights flickered to life, slicing through the darkness, revealing a figure standing in the middle of the road, cloaked in shadow. I swerved to avoid it, my heart racing, the wheels spinning angrily on the gravel. "What do they want from you?" I shouted over the cacophony, desperately seeking answers. "They want to take me back." I escaped, she gasped, her voice teetering on the brink of hysteria. The darkness felt like it was closing in, shadows dancing just beyond the reach of the light. "You can't let them," she cried, and I could hear the desperation lacing her words. "Please, you have to believe me. I wouldn't let them take her. I wouldn't let them take us." I drove faster, weaving through the trees and praying for a way out. Suddenly, my headlights illuminated an old wooden sign, "Welcome to Pine Hollow." It seemed like a cruel joke, as Pine Hollow was supposed to be a safe haven, the kind of place where nothing could go wrong. But I soon realized it was a trap, and it was too late to escape its grasp. As we sped through the quiet town, I noticed something strange. All the lights were out, windows boarded up, doors locked tight. It was as if the entire place had been abandoned, swallowed by the night. I turned the corner, desperation gnawing at my sanity, when I saw them. Figures emerged from the shadows, their features indistinct, but their presence palpable, surrounding the car as we came to a sudden stop. The woman gasped beside me, her breath hitching in fear. "It's too late," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror, just as the door swung open, pulled by invisible hands. A force stronger than I could comprehend dragged her from her seat, her screams echoing in the silence of Pine Hollow. I fought to reach for her, but it was as if a wall of darkness held me back. Just before everything faded to black, I realized I was alone, engulfed by shadow, the woman's terror echoing in my mind. The last reminder of a horror that would never truly let me go. That horror isn't just a reflection of fear, but a living entity feeding on the past, waiting for someone to breathe life into its forgotten tales. Sometimes I can still hear it calling, urging me to return, but I refuse to answer. I know better now. Some stories are meant to remain buried, sealed in shadows where they belong. It started as an ordinary day in a small, quiet town, where the sun rose lazily over the horizon, casting a warm glow on the dew-kissed grass. I found solace in my routine, the mundane rituals that filled my life with normalcy. I worked at the local library, a sanctuary where the smell of old books provided comfort. One fateful evening, as I was preparing to close up, an unusual sound caught my attention, an eerie scratching, delicate yet persistent, emanating from the basement. My heart raced as I recognized that I had never even considered what lay in the depths below. I hesitated, the librarian in me screaming to leave it alone, but the thrill of curiosity pulled me closer to the ominous door that led to that dark, forgotten space. I took a deep breath and descended the creaky wooden stairs, the air growing colder as I descended. The basement was dimly lit, illuminated only by a flickering bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling. Shadows danced around the shelves stocked with antiquated tomes and dusty artifacts long forgotten. My heart thudded in my chest as the scratching grew louder, a frantic, desperate sound echoing through the silence. I moved further into the basement, compelled by an unnameable force, until I reached an old, rotting crate, its lid slightly ajar. The scratching now turned to frantic thumping, and without thinking, I pried the lid open. To my shock, I found nothing inside but a decaying journal, its pages yellowed and brittle, the cover adorned with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Against my better judgment, I opened it and began to read. The words detailed a dark history of the library, of a previous librarian who had sacrificed their sanity in search of forbidden knowledge. Each entry grew more frantic and disturbing, revealing horrific experiences, unexplainable events, shadows in the corners of the library, whispers at night, and a malevolent presence that seemed to haunt the stacks. With every page I turned, the atmosphere around me thickened, and a sense of dread settled in my bones. I decided I had to leave, but as I made my way back toward the stairs, the scratching resumed, now louder and more aggressive. Panic surged through me as I rushed up the steps, the shadows stretching unnaturally, seeming to reach for me. I slammed the door behind me, leaning against it, breathless. My heart raced in a wild tempo as the realization settled in. I was not alone. Over the next few days, the library took on a sinister air. I would hear soft whispers when no one was there and catch glimpses of something darting between the shelves, a fleeting shadow that never truly revealed itself. The other librarians brushed off my concerns, attributing my fright to the overactive imagination of a horror genre enthusiast. But I knew what I felt, an ancient malevolence crawling beneath the surface of our everyday lives. Fewer visitors came to the library, and those who did often left in haste, looking over their shoulders as if aware of an unseen presence that heaved and twisted in the darkness. I decided that I had to learn more about the previous librarian and the curse that seemed to cling to the place like a shroud. I spent sleepless nights poring over old records, encounter reports, and paranormal investigations conducted throughout the years. The dark history beneath the library was deeper than I ever imagined, tied to the very land it rested upon, a site of past violence and dark rituals that sought to harness forbidden powers. As I uncovered more, I felt a pull, an impending dread that something was awakening. One night, a storm raged outside, rain pelting the windows, making the library feel like a fortress amidst the chaos. As I organized the records, the lights flickered, and the air became charged with static. I heard the scratching again, but it was more urgent now, a frantic insistence that echoed in my mind. I felt compelled to return to the basement, driven by an irresistible force. My resolve as a librarian crumbled under the weight of curiosity and fear, and I headed down once more, the dim light guiding my way. To my horror, the crate was open, the journal missing from its resting place. My heart sank, realizing I was not looking for knowledge. I was being hunted. Shadows writhed against the walls, whispering incoherent words that sent shivers down my spine. I wanted to flee but felt paralyzed by a cold grip on my mind. Desperately trying to remain rational, I realized something wanted to share its truth with me, a truth buried in dark memories, and as I turned to leave, a presence materialized before me. The figure of the former librarian, eyes sunken, mouth stretched in a forbidding smile that chilled me to my core. I couldn't escape, my voice caught in my throat, the air heavy with despair. As the apparition reached out, I caught a glimpse of swirling chaos, a world filled with endless torment and suffering. The library was not merely a building. It was a gateway, a bastion of forgotten souls, and the knowledge it contained was a curse. I finally managed to break free from its grip, racing up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me, my heart pounding in my ears. I barricaded myself in the staff room, trembling and gasping for breath, trying to comprehend the horror of what I had encountered. The library buzzed with life, yet I felt utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare that seemed to extend beyond reality. I couldn't go back in, yet I couldn't leave. It was my duty to protect others, but how could I warn them of something so unfathomable? Fear took the reins of my life, twisting my perception, making me question everything I believed. I printed out the history I'd unearthed, left it scattered around the library in hopes others might find it before it was too late, but unease hung thick in the air, and shadows seemed to wiggle closer each night. The last time I stepped inside, I sensed that the library awaited me, inviting me back into its embrace with a sinister allure, a promise of understanding that could unravel the boundaries of sanity. I know now that the truth is a double-edged sword, one that cuts deeper with every revelation, beckoning all who dare to seek. I've resigned myself to never return, an unholy trepidation now gripping my soul. Darkness could not be extinguished, it thrived in silence, waiting, and stalking through the library, where it once held dominion. My life will never again be normal, haunted by whispers that linger like smoke in my mind, reminding me that some doors should remain forever closed. It was the summer of 2012 when I moved into an old, creaky house on the outskirts of town, a place that had long lost its charm but was affordable enough for a college student. The moment I stepped inside, a chill wrapped around me, not the coolness of the air, but something deeper, something waiting. My friends warned me about the history of the house, a local legend they'd heard from their grandparents. They recounted tales of a woman named Clara, who had lived there alone decades ago. It was said that she had gone mad, her mind unraveling with each passing day until one night, her cries pierced the stillness, echoing through the neighborhood. They found her the next day, lifeless in the attic, surrounded by strange drawings and symbols that hinted at something sinister. The townsfolk believed her spirit never left, bound to the house by the darkness she had embraced. I shrugged off the stories, dismissing them as mere folklore, but there was an undeniable heaviness when I settled into my new home. Days turned into nights filled with murmurs and creaks that echoed through the hallways. I often dismissed it as the house settling, but part of me felt a presence watching. It first became apparent on a stormy night, the rain lashing against the windows as I sat at my desk, writing a paper. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, and in that brief moment of brilliance, I caught a glimpse of something, a shadow darting past the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, heart racing, but found nothing but the darkened corners of the room. I shrugged it off. A few nights later, I woke up abruptly, the air thick with an inexplicable tension. The old clock in the hallway chimed eerily, 1:13 a.m. I could hear faint whispers, almost like a distant conversation. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but the whispers grew louder, and I understood snippets of words: help, trapped, never leave. Panic set in, and I pulled the covers tighter around me, trying to shield myself from whatever was tormenting me. I would later learn that the whispers grew familiar, especially on quiet nights when the wind howled outside, carrying an audible echo of sorrow. The weeks went by, and my experiences became more intense. I found strange patterns scratched into the walls, unrecognizable symbols that felt like they were burned into my memory. The feeling of being watched became a constant companion. Friends started noticing my unease. I was jumpy, tired, as if I hadn't slept in days. They suggested I get out more, but each time I returned home, the feeling would wash over me again, a mingling of dread and curiosity. One night, emboldened by the fading daylight, I climbed the stairs to the attic, where Clara once felt her heartbeat fade into the silence. Each step creaked under my weight, and as I reached the top, the air turned colder, the atmosphere thicker. I saw remnants of old furniture covered in dust, but there was an unsettling presence that made it hard to breathe. In the center of the room lay a large easel with a canvas, the only thing untouched by time. I walked over, heart pounding, and as I pulled away the dust cover, I gasped. The painting depicted a woman, Clara, her eyes full of despair, trapped within a prison of her own making, the symbols from the walls swirling around her like snakes. I stumbled back, realizing I had unknowingly entered her world. That night was the worst I experienced. The whispers returned, louder, desperate, and filled with anguish, threatening to engulf me. I felt fingers trace my neck, brushing so softly I could hardly believe it was real. My heart raced as shadows danced around the room, morphing into shapes that felt both familiar and terrifying. I screamed, begging it to stop, to leave me alone, but the shadows only grew darker, feeding off my fear. I fled the house that night, not stopping until I reached the safety of a friend's apartment. Days turned into weeks as I tried to distance myself from the house, finding refuge in the company of others. Each time I closed my eyes, however, Clara's face haunted me, the longing in her eyes piercing through my consciousness. I tried to forget her, yet her whispers lingered in my mind. Late one night, drawn by an inexplicable force, I returned to the house alone, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a wavering resolve. As I ascended the stairs to the attic, I felt Clara's energy enveloping me, almost protective. The easel still stood there, the painting untouched, and I approached it slowly, unable to tear my eyes away. I reached out to touch the canvas, and an overwhelming sensation crashed over me: pain, sorrow, longing. The symbols around her began to glow, pulsing with a life of their own, and I realized Clara was not just a specter. She was a part of the house, her essence woven into its very fabric. Then, in a moment of clarity, I understood her plight. She was trapped, a soul longing for release. I whispered words of comfort, promising I would help. It was a solemn vow, binding the two of us in that cursed attic. I gathered the courage to call upon her spirit, using my own voice to echo the incantations that seemed to rise from deep within my soul. The air crackled around me, and the shadows twisted like angry serpents, but I persisted. Gradually, the whispers faded into sobs, and the burden lifted. Clara's painted eyes softened, the agony dissipating as a bright light enveloped the room. And just like that, she was gone, finally free. As dawn broke, I stood in the attic, empty and quiet for the first time. I felt a shift, a release of tension, and I descended the stairs with a lighter heart. The house, once filled with dread, felt different now, welcoming even, free of the malevolence that had tainted it for so long. I spent the rest of that summer restoring the house, filling it with vibrancy and warmth, letting go of its burdened past. Clara was no longer a prisoner. She became a part of my journey, a reminder of the delicate balance between light and dark. Each haunting shadow had been a plea, a cry for help, and in embracing the fear, I had found freedom, not just for Clara but for myself. The house, once a vessel of horror, became a sanctuary, a testament to healing, of how light could penetrate the darkest corners when one dared to listen. I always thought my childhood home was a place of warmth and laughter, yet now, as I sift through the memories, I can't help but feel a chill creeping up my spine. It was an ordinary house, nestled in a quiet neighborhood, with a white picket fence and a creaky wooden porch. My parents loved that house. They used to say it was filled with good energy, but that's not how I remember it. As a child, I was often alone after school. My parents both worked late, and I'd come home to an empty house. At first, I didn't mind. I played with my toys or watched cartoons until they returned. But as the years went by, I started to notice the strange things that happened when I was home alone. It began with the whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind creeping through the windows or maybe the house settling, but soon I realized it was more than that. I'd hear hushed voices calling my name, low and almost melodic. I tried to ignore it. After all, kids have vivid imaginations. But one evening, while I was practicing my piano, I heard clear as day, "Robert, come play with us." My heart raced. I turned, expecting to see my friends playing on the lawn. Instead, I was met with darkness. The sun had set, and shadows twisted in the corners of the room. I didn't reply. I just continued playing, hoping it would go away. If only I had known then that ignoring it would turn out to be a mistake. The whispers became more persistent. They beckoned me, almost coaxing me to answer, to play, to join whatever ghostly games they had in mind. One night, I was jolted awake by a soft tugging at my blankets. My first thought was that it was my little sister, but I quickly remembered she was staying at our grandparents' house that weekend. I lay still, heart pounding, daring myself to turn around and face whatever darkness awaited me. But I stayed frozen, listening as the whispers grew louder, swirling around my head, filling the room like a sinister symphony. The tugging stopped, but the whispers transformed into giggles, echoing through the air in a chilling tune. That was the night I decided that I needed to speak up. I told my parents, thinking maybe they'd chalk it up to childhood fears. But instead, their faces turned pale. "You've always had an imagination," my mother said softly, glancing at my father, who seemed lost in thought. They dismissed my concerns but promised to monitor the situation. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers grew bolder. They weren't just voices anymore. I began to see fleeting shadows out of the corner of my eye. Small figures darted past hallways, flitting just beyond the edge of my vision. I started to dread coming home, knowing that every creak of the floorboards was a reminder that I was not alone. Then came the night of the storm. The power went out, plunging the house into darkness. I huddled under my blankets, clutching my phone for light, praying that the storm would pass quickly. The whispers returned, sharper, as if excited by the tumult outside. "Robert," they echoed, "we're waiting." I felt a cold breeze ripple through the room, and my phone flickered ominously before dying. In the darkness, terror washed over me. I felt something brush against my leg. I leapt out of bed, nearly tripping as I scrambled for the door. But before I could reach it, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping me inside with the unseen tormentors. I pounded on the door, screaming for my parents, but the storm drowned out my cries. The whispers became a cacophony, children's laughter surrounding me, overwhelming me, taunting me. Whenever I think about it now, I can still feel the chill of that night, the sense of being utterly alone and powerless. Somehow, I managed to break free and fled down the hall toward my parents' room, not daring to look behind me. I burst through their door, panting and shaking, descriptions of my experience tumbling out in a frenzy as I begged them to believe me. To my shock, they finally relented, admitting that they had seen and heard things over the years, soft music playing from the piano when no one was there, laughter echoing down the halls when the house lay silent. They had tried to ignore it, just like I did, but I wasn't willing to live with it anymore. The next day, we reached out to a local paranormal expert. He arrived with equipment and a steady demeanor, ready to explore the unsettling energy that clung to our home. As he walked through the house waving his EMF detector, I could feel the tension in the air. He paused in the living room, a thoughtful expression on his face. "There's definitely something here," he said, his voice low. "It feels like there are multiple presences, children." My heart sank. The whispers turned into a promise of something sinister. I didn't want to know what else lurked in the shadows of a house I once called home. For a week, he conducted investigations, yet every night the laughter continued, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. Eventually, after the final night with him, he performed a cleansing ritual, chanting words I couldn't understand. The atmosphere shifted, the air felt heavier yet oddly calm. I always thought my childhood home was a place of warmth and laughter, yet now, as I sift through the memories, I can't help but feel a chill creeping up my spine. It was an ordinary house, nestled in a quiet neighborhood, with a white picket fence and a creaky wooden porch. My parents loved that house. They used to say it was filled with good energy, but that's not how I remember it. As a child, I was often alone after school. My parents both worked late, and I'd come home to an empty house. At first, I didn't mind. I played with my toys or watched cartoons until they returned. But as the years went by, I started to notice the strange things that happened when I was home alone. It began with the whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind creeping through the windows or maybe the house settling, but soon I realized it was more than that. I'd hear hushed voices calling my name, low and almost melodic. I tried to ignore it. After all, kids have vivid imaginations. But one evening, it was a crisp autumn evening when I decided to take a stroll through the woods behind my childhood home, a place that had always felt like a sanctuary. The trees towered above like ancient sentinels, their leaves rustling gentle whispers as I navigated the familiar trails. Despite the comforting backdrop, there was an unsettling instinct tugging at the edges of my mind, one that I chose to ignore, convincing myself that my fears were rooted in childhood tales and not reality. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting elongated shadows that danced eerily around me. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach the clearing before darkness enveloped the forest. That's when I noticed something strange, a distant light flickering through the trees, like the glow from a lantern, beckoning me deeper into the woods. Curiosity piqued, I cautiously followed the light, my heart pounding with both intrigue and trepidation. The path had grown narrow, overgrown with brambles that seemed almost alive, brushing against my skin with every step I took, as if warning me to turn back. As I approached the source of the light, I stumbled upon an old, decrepit cabin that had been hidden behind a curtain of ivy and gnarled roots. There was an inexplicable aura radiating from it, a magnetic pull that compelled me to approach despite my better judgment. The door hung ajar, creaking softly in the breeze, almost inviting me inside. Hesitating for a moment, I glanced back the way I came, expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows, but I was alone. I stepped across the threshold, and the air inside felt thick and stale, like a long-forgotten secret waiting to be unearthed. The cabin was devoid of furniture, its walls adorned with peeling wallpaper and strange inscriptions that seemed to twist as I moved. A chill crept down my spine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle in my stomach. The only sound was the faint echo of my footsteps against the wooden floor, and then, from somewhere deep within the bowels of the cabin, I heard it, a low, resonant hum that stirred the air around me. I paused, straining to hear, and the humming morphed into an unintelligible whisper, wrapping around my mind like tendrils of smoke. Panic surged through me, urging me to run, but my body refused to obey. Instead, I felt drawn toward a trapdoor nestled in the corner, its surface stained and worn. With tremors shaking my hands, I forced it open, revealing a dark staircase spiraling downward into the abyss. It felt like the heart of the earth itself was calling me, and against all instinct, I descended those steps. The palpable darkness enveloped me, and with each downward step, the whispers grew louder, morphing into desperate pleas and agonized cries. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon me, scrutinizing my every move. Reaching the bottom, I stepped into a dimly lit chamber that reeked of decay. Shadows flitted across the walls, distorting reality into something grotesque. In the center stood a weathered altar, items strewn across its surface, bones, trinkets, and pieces of fabric stained with something dark and sinister. I felt a sickening realization wash over me. I was standing in the remnants of rituals long forgotten, a place of unspeakable horrors where the boundaries of the living and dead thinned. The whispers rose to a crescendo. A sudden chill ran through me, and as I turned to flee, I felt a cold hand grip my wrist. In that instant, terror coursed through my veins, and I froze. There, in the flickering candlelight at the far end of the room, I saw something emerge, an ethereal figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured, but its presence suffocatingly real. It raised a long arm, beckoning me closer while the whispers transformed into a cacophony of despair, begging me to understand. My mind raced, flooded with images of the forest, the cabin, and the choices that led me here. I yanked my arm away and turned to run, but the shadows seemed to engulf me, pulling me back into their embrace. I stumbled back up the stairs, the howls of anguish clawing at my sanity. I burst through the trapdoor, gasping for breath as I navigated the cabin's disorienting halls. The whispers faded behind me, but the oppressive feeling loomed large, constricting my chest. I fled into the woods, branches scratching at my skin, the ground uneven beneath my frantic feet. When I finally emerged from the trees, gasping in the cool night air, I turned back, my heart hammering in my chest. The cabin was gone, as if it had never existed. Only the peeling bark of the trees remained, standing vigil over the secrets they held. I stumbled back home, limbs heavy and mind racing, forever haunted by the knowledge that certain places hold deep, dark histories best left undisturbed. The forest returned to its serene state as dawn broke, but I learned the truth. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. And in the silence of those woods, I felt a watching presence, a reminder that the horror I encountered was merely a thread in the vast tapestry of darkness woven into the fabric of reality. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself standing in front of our old family cabin nestled deep in the woods. It had been years since I last visited, but the memories flooded back as I approached the creaky door, each step echoing in the quietness that surrounded me. The air was thick with a damp chill, whispering tales of times long past, a time when I would spend countless summer days playing with my siblings, running through the fields, and exploring the woods. But there was something darker embedded in those memories, a singular incident that I could never shake off. I had promised myself I would never return, yet here I was, drawn back by some inexplicable force. As night settled in, the gentle rustle of leaves turned into something more sinister, and an unease crept into my chest. Inside, the cabin was mostly untouched, save for layers of dust and the musty smell of neglect. I flicked on a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, revealing the familiar outlines of old furniture and faded photographs. It was then I saw it, an old diary resting on a table in the corner, its leather cover cracked and worn. My heart raced as I recognized it as our mother's, a relic of her life before everything changed. I opened it hesitantly, the pages yellowed with age, and began to read. Each entry painted a picture of our family's joys and sorrows, but as I flipped further, the tone shifted. Entries became frantic, marked with shaky handwriting, speaking of shadows lurking in the woods and whispers that echoed through the night. My fingers trembled as I read about late-night cries that cut through the silence, screams that were never explained, dark figures slipping between the trees. Then a chilling entry caught my eye. I can hear it again, the scratching on the walls, and at night, something peering through the window, watching us. A shudder ran down my spine. I had always thought those tales were products of a wild imagination. But the more I read, the more I recognized incidents I had brushed off as childhood fears. That was when I heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from outside. My heart leapt into my throat as I closed the diary and listened intently. It was subtle at first, but as it persisted, it grew louder, like claws raking against the wooden exterior of the cabin. Adrenaline coursed through me, pushing me to investigate. Half expecting to see an animal, I cautiously creaked open the door, the hinges protesting against the silence. The moonlight bathed the clearing in an ethereal glow, yet the surrounding wood swallowed the light, its depth shrouded in darkness. I stepped outside, the cool air biting at my skin, and peered into the trees. The scratching sound ceased, leaving behind an oppressive silence that hung in the air. "Hello," I called out, my voice breaking the stillness. My own words felt like a challenge thrown into the void. No response, just the rustle of leaves dancing in the wind. I took a step forward, compelled by a force I couldn't name, curiosity battling against fear. "It's probably just a raccoon," I whispered to myself, trying to shake off the growing dread. I moved deeper into the woods, the shadows wrapping around me tighter. That's when I saw it, a pair of glinting eyes staring back from the underbrush. They were unnaturally large, the figure behind them remaining hidden in the darkness. Something primal kicked in, and a surge of terror pushed me to turn back, to run. I stumbled over roots and branches, breath catching in my throat. But the thing in the woods followed, its movements fluid, almost graceful, closing the distance between us. I burst through the trees back to the cabin, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against it, pressing my ear against the wood, listening. The scratching was back, but now it was accompanied by soft, unearthly whispers, snippets of words I couldn't quite make out. My mind raced as panic set in. I had to escape, but the only way out was through that door. I looked around the cabin for anything to defend myself with, heart racing uncontrollably. The whispers grew louder, urgent, cacophonous. I grabbed a heavy flashlight, clutching it like a lifeline, and steeled myself. Mustering every ounce of courage, I flung the door open and charged into the night, swinging the flashlight wildly. The woods were eerily silent, the entity now gone. My breath came out in frantic gasps, but I knew I couldn't linger. I sprinted from my car, heart pounding, glancing back only once to see a shadow dissolve into the underbrush. The memory of that chilling night is etched deep within me, a haunting reminder of what lies beyond the light, waiting, watching. I've never returned, but I feel the woods calling me back. Sometimes at night, when the wind howls just right, I swear I hear whispers beckoning me into the darkness, and I can't shake the feeling that something is still out there, just beyond the trees, waiting for my return. In the quiet town of Havenwood, nestled among thick woods and rolling hills, lived a woman named Clara. For as long as she could remember, life there had been monotonous yet comforting, wrapped up in the routine of a small-town existence. Each day began with her morning coffee on the porch, letting the soft sounds of nature awaken her senses while the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. But behind Clara's everyday normalcy lay a secret, one that would unravel her world and expose the darkness that lingered beneath the surface. It was just after her 35th birthday when the peculiar events began. That night, Clara sat in her living room, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The wind howled outside, rattling the old wooden window frames, but it was nothing new. She found it oddly comforting. As she sat flipping through the pages of a worn book, a chill crept over her. It wasn't the cold external air, but something far more unsettling that made her body tense. Over the next few days, Clara noticed small, unexplainable occurrences, items misplaced, whispers echoing in empty rooms, and fleeting shadows that seemed to flit out of the corner of her eye. She initially dismissed them as tricks of her imagination, the result of sleep deprivation from her demanding job as a night nurse. But when the occurrences escalated, when she found her late mother's jewelry box open and its contents strewn across the living room floor, panic began to settle in. One evening, after a particularly long shift at the hospital, Clara returned home exhausted. She collapsed onto her sofa, ready to drown out the day's exhaustion with mindless television. Just as she began to doze off, a chill swept through the room, pulling her back to reality. The lights flickered violently, and the television screen static filled momentarily before a face emerged, a ghostly visage that made her heart race. A woman, hollow-eyed and pale, stared back at her, mouthing words that didn't reach her ears. Clara screamed, leaping back and switching off the television. Her chest heaved as she stumbled back against the wall, trying to convince herself it had been an optical illusion. Yet, the moment remained etched in her mind, visceral and unshakable. That night, sleep eluded her. Shadows flitted across her walls, and soft whispers filled her ears, a chorus of sorrowful sounds that echoed through her home. In desperate search for answers, Clara visited the town's elder, Mrs. Abernathy, known for her knowledge of local lore and history. The old woman peered at Clara over her glasses, her eyes clouded but steady. "This town holds its secrets tightly," she whispered, her voice raspy with age. "You might have woken something. Be careful, dear." With trepidation, Clara returned home, her mind racing with possibilities that spiraled into paranoia. Each creak of the floorboards made her jump. Every gust of wind felt like an omen. The shadows grew darker, sometimes pooling at the corners of her vision, and the whispers turned into faint, sorrowful cries. One night, she awoke to find herself paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream as the spectral form of the woman she had seen on the television now hovered above her, weeping silently, desperate for a solution. Clara delved into the history of Havenwood. She spent countless hours at the library, sifting through dusty records and old newspapers. What she uncovered instilled a new layer of fear, a tale of tragedy. Decades ago, a woman named Lydia had lived in her house, a kind soul who had been wronged by the townspeople, accused unjustly of witchcraft. After her wrongful execution, it was said her spirit roamed the woods, seeking justice and peace. Clara was horrified. She had become a vessel for Lydia's pain, her home a battleground for unresolved grief. Determined to set things right, Clara sought ways to appease Lydia. She researched rituals and offerings, began to leave tokens of respect and remembrance, a piece of jewelry, a handwritten note, an offering of flowers. But each gesture seemed only to fuel the spirit's unrest. The cries grew louder and more desperate, often manifesting as pounding on the walls and violent storms that rattled the windows. One stormy night, harnessed by fear and desperation, Clara performed a makeshift ritual in her living room, hoping to provide release to the troubled spirit. She lit candles and spoke softly, expressing her intent to help Lydia find peace. As she invoked the spirit, the room grew icy, the atmosphere thick with tension. An ear-splitting screech erupted, shaking the very foundation of the house. The lights flickered violently before plunging her into darkness. Panic consumed her, but she held her ground, determined to confront the entity. Just then, she felt a breath on her neck, and the air turned electric. "Help me," a voice rasped, painfully familiar. In that moment, Clara realized she was not just a bystander, but a part of Lydia's story. With newfound resolve, she acknowledged the pain and injustice suffered by Lydia, offering her own hope and understanding. "You are not alone," Clara whispered. "I will help you find justice." The temperature in the room began to change, shifting from icy dread to a comforting warmth. The voice regained its clarity. "They must know," it implored, and the shadows lifted just enough for Clara to feel a sense of calm wash over her, determined to bring Lydia's story to light. Clara dedicated herself to unearthing the truth of what had happened those many years ago. She contacted historians, connected with distant relatives of Lydia's, and documented every piece of evidence. Finally, with the support of the community, Clara uncovered the truth and organized a memorial, giving Lydia the voice she had long been denied. The day of the memorial brought an unexpected peace to Havenwood. In the quiet town of Havenwood, nestled among thick woods and rolling hills, lived a woman named Clara. For as long as she could remember, life there had been monotonous yet comforting, wrapped up in the routine of a small-town existence. Each day began with her morning coffee on the porch, letting the soft sounds of nature awaken her senses while the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. But behind Clara's everyday normalcy lay a secret, one that would unravel her world and expose the darkness that lingered beneath the surface. It was just after her 35th birthday when the peculiar events began. That night, Clara sat in her living room, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows that danced along. "I can still remember the first time I set foot in that old, creaking house at the end of Willow Lane. It had been abandoned for decades, or so we thought. The townsfolk spun tales of a family that had vanished without a trace, leaving only whispers of sorrow and dread hanging in the air like the stale smell of decay. I was a curious teenager, the kind who thrived on thrills and the paranormal. So one cold October evening, emboldened by my friends' laughter and the dares echoing in my ears, I decided to explore the infamous old place. As night fell, we approached the mansion, its silhouette shrouded in darkness, a monstrous figure against the moonlit sky. The peeling paint and broken windows made it seem almost alive, as if holding its breath, waiting for intruders. My friends huddled close, their nervous banter falling silent as we stepped onto the creaky porch. The front door hung ajar, an invitation or a warning, I wasn't sure which. I pushed it open, the sound of grinding wood piercing the silence like a scream. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the scent of mold, a grim reminder that life had once flourished here. Now nothing but shadows remained. We flicked our flashlights around, revealing faded wallpaper and a staircase that spiraled into darkness, every creak and groan of the house sending shivers down my spine. My heart raced with a blend of excitement and fear as I led the way. As we moved deeper, our laughter began to fade, swallowed by the oppressive silence. My friends gathered into a whispering group, sharing nervous giggles and daring each other to go further down the darkened hall. I pushed on, drawn by an inexplicable pull. I found myself stepping into what looked like a parlor, the remnants of a once grand space. Torn furniture lay scattered, and a grand piano rested in the corner, a dark, dusty hulk of wood. I couldn't resist. I approached it, my fingers hovering over the keys, hesitant but curious. A soft touch sent a shudder through the room as a single note rang out, echoing hauntingly. I jumped back, a chill creeping down my spine. Just then, I heard a whisper, soft, almost melodic. I turned to my friends, their faces pale with fear. "Did you hear that?" I asked, but they only nodded, wide-eyed but too frightened to speak. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Get out. Leave." It sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I felt an overwhelming urge to flee, but something kept me rooted in place. "It's just the wind," someone whispered, though even they didn't sound convinced. Ignoring the warning, I took a cautious step forward, drawn to the source of the sound. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a tempest, a cacophony of lost voices begging for release. I felt the atmosphere shift, a heavy weight pressing in on me, thick and suffocating. Suddenly, one of my friends yelled out behind me, "Look!" At the window. I turned to see what they were pointing at, but my breath hitched in my throat. Shadows moved outside, indistinct figures flitting by, just out of focus. My pulse quickened and panic surged through me. I was being watched. "We should go," I managed to choke out, but before I could turn back, a cold gust swept through the room, extinguishing our flashlights one by one. Darkness enveloped us, and I felt a rush of terror as I reached for my friends. Their voices dissolved into chaos, and I was alone, lost in the pitch-black void. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding, the whispers now rising to a fevered pitch around me. "Join us. Stay with us." My instincts screamed for me to run, but when I tried to move, it felt like the very ground was pulling me down, an unseen force holding me back. Panic clawed at my throat as I felt a cold breath on my neck. Something was there, something angry and restless. I let out a terrified scream, and in that moment, the tumult of shadows coalesced into a piercing shriek that echoed through the halls. The walls seemed to shudder, and then all at once, the oppressive darkness lifted as flashes of light flickered in my vision. My friends reappeared, their faces ghostly pale, and with a united scream, we bolted for the door. We ran, adrenaline pumping, our hearts racing as we burst out of the house. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of the streetlights, breathless and trembling. Behind us, the house stood ominously still, silent again, but I could have sworn I heard the whispers fading into the night, their cries lingering just out of reach. We swore to never return, our adventure forever etched in our minds. But the fear took hold, digging deeper into my spirit. I could no longer shake the feeling that something had followed me home. The nightmares started almost immediately. Each night was a haunting rendition of the whispers, swirling in my head like a sinister lullaby. I would wake up gasping, feeling as if I had been pulled into another realm, a dark world filled with shadows. My friends, too, felt it, the way the shadows danced just beyond their vision, the whispers that seemed to lure them back in their dreams. We avoided the house, but it lingered in our thoughts, a sinister specter that wouldn't let go. The more we tried to forget, the more we were drawn back. One cold, moonlit night, I found myself staring at the house again without meaning to. The window where I had seen the faces seemed to beckon me. Compelled by a force I couldn't resist, I wandered back to Willow Lane. As I stepped onto the porch that night, it felt different. Zorba's presence was stronger, almost palpable. I hesitated for a moment, but I was consumed by an insatiable curiosity, pushing the door open once again. The house breathed around me, and the whispers returned, wrapping around my mind, intoxicating me. This time, there was no fleeing, no running away. I felt myself being pulled toward that piano, fingers moving on their own as they brushed the keys. A haunting melody filled the air, more elaborate than before, an invitation. The figures appeared again, their faces clearer this time, their expressions pained, longing. They hovered close, begging for release from their torment. I was trapped between fear and the allure of their sorrowful calls, realizing too late that each note I played was binding me closer to them. I felt cold hands brush my shoulders, pulling me deeper into the darkness. The whispers crescendoed, drowning out my thoughts, each tendril of darkness wrapping around me tighter. "Stay with us," I gasped, but I couldn't speak. I was losing myself to the music, to the shadows that promised freedom from the world I had known. Just as I felt myself slipping away, I remembered my friends, their terrified faces, their pleas for help. A surge of love broke through the fog, a reminder of the warmth of the living. I broke from the stronghold of the shadows, reversing the melody I had summoned, desperately trying to remember the notes that once held me captive. As I played, the house trembled around me, shadows screeching in rage, pulling one last time before they recoiled. The shrieks faded into silence as the whispers turned into wails of despair, and with a final note, I felt a release, a tear in the fabric of the darkness. I found myself back outside, gasping for air, the moon illuminating a clear path home. Shaken to my core, I vowed to never return to Willow Lane, to that cursed house that thrived on fear, longing, and the souls of the unfortunate. And yet, even now, years later, sometimes I hear the whispers seep through the night, calling me back, reminding me of the shadows that dance just at the corner of my vision. I've learned to ignore them, but deep down, I know the house still stands, still waits, and still hungers for those who dare to unlock its dark secrets. The memories persist, haunting my dreams, a reminder of that fateful night where I almost became one of them. The lost souls wait for their freedom, still whispering, still calling. It was a damp, foggy night when I first stepped into the old abandoned house at the edge of town. The townsfolk had long since whispered about its dark history, spinning tales of its last occupant, a reclusive artist who was rumored to have dabbled in the occult. No one dared approach the crumbling structure, its windows shattered and covered in a thick layer of grime. Yet an inexplicable urge drew me towards it. As I pushed the creaky front door open, a chill ran down my spine, and I wondered if I was stepping into a realm that had been untouched by time or perhaps cursed by it. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the scent of decay, as though the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for me. As I wandered through the dilapidated halls, I noticed strange symbols etched into the walls, their meanings lost to time, but they seemed to pulse with energy, beckoning me closer. In one of the rooms, I discovered an old canvas, splattered with dark, chaotic colors that seemed to swirl and bleed into one another. My heart raced as I felt drawn to it, as if it was alive. I touched the surface, and a jolt of electricity shot through me, causing my vision to blur for a split second. Suddenly, I was no longer in the room but standing in a dense, dark forest under a swirling sky that shifted and morphed, filled with twisted trees that seemed to whisper my name. Confused and terrified, I stumbled through the shadows, aware that something was watching me, lurking just beyond my sight. Panic surged as I heard voices, faint at first but growing louder, a cacophony of sorrow and despair that filled my mind with chaos. I realized that I was not alone in this place, that the spirits of those who had visited before me remained trapped in the void, unable to break free. I felt their pain, their desperation clawing at my heart, urging me to leave, yet another part of me was drawn deeper into the darkness. It was then I caught a glimpse of a figure cloaked in shadow, its face obscured, but its piercing eyes locked onto mine. It reached out in a gesture that was both inviting and menacing, compelling me to follow. I hesitated, a battle raging within me, my instinct screamed to run, to escape while I still could, yet a morbid curiosity urged me to stay. I stepped closer, feeling the air grow heavy around me, charged with a palpable energy that vibrated in my bones. My feet moved almost of their own accord as I walked towards the figure, each step echoing in the silence. I was standing at the edge of the abyss, the shadow swirling like smoke, threatening to engulf me. The figure began to speak, its voice a chilling whisper that sent shivers down my spine. It spoke of the artist, of the madness that consumed him, how he had painted his own demons into existence. With each stroke of his brush, he had summoned something dark and powerful, a malevolent force that thrived on despair and suffering. Those who came to witness his art were drawn in, just as I had been, and they too became part of his twisted masterpiece, lost forever in this dark realm. I felt a sudden surge of clarity flash through me, a realization wrapped in horror. I was becoming one of them, a fleeting soul trapped in a cycle of fear and madness. The shadows began to close in around me, their tendrils creeping toward my feet as desperation clawed at my throat. I turned, sprinting back through the dense forest, the cries of the lost echoing in my ears, urging me to return as I fought against the suffocating darkness. It was a race against time, against the very essence of despair that sought to claim me. I broke through the tree line, back into the room, the canvas looming large before me, a portal to the abyss. I desperately grabbed the edge of the canvas and tore it down, the fabric ripping in my hands, releasing a wave of energy that knocked me backward. I tumbled onto the floor, gasping for breath as the whispers faded into silence. I lay there, trembling, the remnants of fear still coursing through my veins. My heart raced as I took in my surroundings, the house eerily still, as if it had never been disturbed. I bolted upright, my mind racing with thoughts of escape, but something made me pause. I glanced at the remnants of the canvas, and in that moment, I saw not just paint, but the tortured souls of those who had been caught in the artist's web. They were begging for release, trapped in a single moment of despair. A surge of compassion washed over me, and I suddenly realized that I had to help them, to break the cycle. I had to finish what the artist had started, but this time with love instead of darkness. I ripped off more of the canvas, using my own blood to paint over the dark strokes, infusing it with light, with hope. The air thickened around me, electrified with change as the shadows fought back, angry at my defiance. I could hear their wails, their sorrow wrapping around my heart, threatening to pull me into the depths of despair once more. But I pressed on, splattering brighter colors as I created scenes of love, of life, of joyous moments that had been woven into the fabric of reality but lost within this darkness. As I painted, I felt a warmth envelop me, it was a damp, foggy night when I first stepped into the old abandoned house at the edge of town. The townsfolk had long since whispered about its dark history, spinning tales of its last occupant, a reclusive artist who was rumored to have dabbled in the occult. No one dared approach the crumbling structure, its windows shattered and covered in a thick layer of grime. Yet an inexplicable urge drew me towards it. As I pushed the creaky front door open, a chill ran down my spine, and I wondered if I was stepping into a realm that had been untouched by time or perhaps cursed by it. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the scent of decay, as though the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for me. As I wandered through the dilapidated halls, I noticed strange symbols etched into the walls, their meanings lost to time, but they seemed to pulse with energy, beckoning me closer. In one of the rooms, I discovered an old canvas, splattered with dark, chaotic colors that seemed to swirl and bleed into one another. My heart raced as I felt drawn to it, as if it was alive. I touched the surface, and a jolt of electricity shot through me, causing my vision to blur for a split second. Suddenly, I was no longer in the room but standing in a dense, dark forest under a swirling sky that shifted, and I had always been fascinated by the idea of living alone in the woods. The silence, the solitude, it beckoned to me like a siren song, promising peace and a return to nature that I so desperately craved. So, when I found a decrepit old cabin tucked away deep in the forest, I jumped at the chance to escape the chaos of city life. The cabin was weathered and worn, consumed by creeping vines and shaded by towering pines, but it had a certain charm that spoke to me. I moved in during the late autumn, when the leaves crunched underfoot and the air turned crisp. The first nights were blissful. The sounds of the forest enveloped me like a comforting blanket. There was something calming about the crackling of the fireplace, the rustling of the leaves, and the distant hoot of an owl. I spent my days exploring the surrounding woods, collecting firewood, and getting to know the land. As November settled in, the days grew shorter and the nights longer, plunging the cabin into darkness. I tried to embrace the solitude, but as the weeks wore on, I found myself starting to feel an unsettling presence in the woods. I would catch glimpses of movement just beyond my line of sight, shadows darting between the trees, almost too quick to register. Was it animals? Or was I simply letting my imagination run wild? I told myself that I was just on edge from being alone, but each night, as I lay in bed, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. One particularly cold night, while I sat in front of the fire, I heard a faint thud outside, followed by a soft rustling sound. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned off the lantern and peered out the grimy window, attempting to see what lurked in the darkness. I saw nothing but the swaying branches and whispering winds, but my instincts screamed at me to be cautious. The next night was eerily quiet, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. I settled in for the night, the shadows in the corners of the room seeming to stretch and twist in grotesque shapes. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard it again, a faint tapping, rhythmic and methodical. The sound rapped against the wood of the cabin, a soft insistence that sent chills down my spine. In a frantic attempt to dispel my fear, I grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the door, peering through the battered screen. The moonlight cast ghostly shadows across the ground, and for a moment, I thought I could see something. No, someone standing at the edge of the tree lane. I blinked hard, but when I focused my eyes, the figure vanished, leaving only the rustling leaves. My heart raced as I locked the door, sealing myself inside. Sleep eluded me that night, my mind swimming with paranoia and dread. Soon, the tapping began again, louder this time, a rhythmic knock that echoed in the stillness. It was as if something was trying to get my attention, beckoning me to open that door. I stayed silent, afraid to give in to the temptation of curiosity. The nights dragged on, each one more tense than the last. The tapping persisted, accompanied now by soft whispers that floated through the cracks in the cabin's walls. I tried to distinguish the words, but they were incoherent, a language I couldn't understand. Was it my mind playing tricks on me, or was something truly out there? I began to lose track of time. Days blended effortlessly into nights. The isolation was becoming unbearable, and I felt the walls of the cabin tightening around me. In a moment of desperation, I ventured outside during the daylight, hoping the sun would chase the shadows away. As I walked further into the woods, a strange sense of dread washed over me. It was eerily quiet, no birds singing, no rustling of animals, just silence. I stumbled upon a small clearing, and at its center stood a circle of stones that looked like an ancient altar. Unease gripped my heart as I felt a heavy presence in the air. The ground felt wrong beneath my feet, as if history itself seeped from the earth. I turned to leave, but the whispers returned, louder now, swirling around me like a storm. They clawed at my sanity, burrowing deep into my mind. I hurried back to the cabin, locking the door behind me, but the oppressive atmosphere followed. Desperation took hold, and I began packing my belongings, determined to leave the curse of that place behind. Yet as the sun dipped below the horizon, the tapping echoed once more, now desperate, frantic, like fingernails scraping against the wood. I could feel the whispers coiling around my thoughts, urging me to listen, to let them in. I pressed my back against the door, chanting to myself that it wasn't real, that it was just my imagination. But then I heard it, the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the cabin, the snap of branches underfoot. A chill ran down my spine as the door trembled beneath the pressure. I held my breath, my heart racing. What was out there? My mind raced through possibilities, but before I could calm my nerves, there came a voice, a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the cabin. It wasn't human. It felt wrong, distorted, and angry. I scrambled for anything I could use as a weapon, gripping a heavy candlestick with clammy hands. The doorknob rattled violently, rattling against the wood. I took a step back, dread washing over me. Suddenly, the door shuddered again, then opened just a crack, as if something wanted to slip inside. In that moment, all thoughts of leaving vanished. I had to know what was there, what haunted me. I threw the door wide open, the wind howling as I stepped outside, ready to face the unknown. The clearing was empty, the shadows lengthening as the last light faded from the sky. But then, through the trees, I saw it, an outline standing among the woods, almost unrecognizable, a twisted figure watching me with hollow eyes. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar as I stumbled backward, the sound wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. I turned to run, but the darkness seemed to close in, the trees shifting and warping, becoming monstrous. I couldn't escape. The whispers turned to laughter, a cacophony that filled my head with chaos. I fell to my knees, the haunting presence enveloping me, dragging me down into an abyss. Then, suddenly, silence. I opened my eyes to find myself back in the cabin, disoriented and confused. Had it all been a dream? But the walls felt different. They loomed larger, more oppressive. I stumbled to the door, desperate to breathe fresh air, but it wouldn't budge, sealed as if by some unseen force. Panicked, I banged on the door, shouting for help, my voice swallowed by the endless night. The whispers returned, soft now, almost comforting. They spoke to me, promising that I would never be alone again. And in that moment, I realized the horrifying truth. I had become part of the forest, a lingering presence, forever trapped between the shadows and the trees, whispering to anyone foolish enough to listen. I was never the type to believe in ghosts or hauntings. I was more of a skeptic, grounded firmly in reality. That was until I moved into my new apartment in a decrepit old building on the outskirts of town. The rent was unbelievably low, but I was desperate for a place to call my own after a messy breakup. The first few nights passed without incident, just the usual settling sounds of a building that had seen better days. It wasn't until the fifth night that everything changed. I was in bed, scrolling through social media as the clock ticked towards midnight. The old heating system in the building creaked ominously, but I was used to it by now. Suddenly, I heard a soft, almost childlike giggle echoing down the dark hallway outside my bedroom. I sat up, my heart pounding, convinced it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I brushed it off, telling myself it was probably just the pipes. A week passed, and the laughter returned, always at the same time, around midnight, followed by the sound of soft footsteps. It was unsettling. I decided to confront my fears. I peeked out into the dim hallway, but there was nothing there, only the shadows flickering in the light of the single, worn bulb hanging above. I told myself it had to be a neighbor's child playing a prank, or maybe just my mind overactive from binge-watching horror series. The next night, I set up my phone to record the sounds, curious about what I might capture. As the clock neared midnight, the giggling started once more, this time closer than before. My phone vibrated with notifications as I tried to capture the sound, and I felt a chill creep up my spine, as if someone were watching me. I barely slept that night, jumping at every creak and groan of the building. When I finally checked the footage the next morning, I couldn't believe my eyes. The screen was filled with static, with fleeting images of a shadowy figure flitting through the hall, the giggles distorted and hollow. I felt a cold sweat break out on my brow. Had I really captured something? I convinced myself it was just a trick of the light or perhaps a bug in the recording app. Reality, however, was beginning to feel insufferably thin. Days turned into weeks, and the activity escalated. It wasn't just the giggles anymore. I started hearing whispers, soft and unintelligible, yet persistent. There were also times when I would return home to find my belongings inexplicably rearranged, an item moved just out of place, or the lights flickering when I walked past. I began to feel like I was losing my grip on sanity. I confided in a friend, showing her the video and recounting my experiences, but she dismissed it as stress and suggested I might be overthinking things. One particularly harrowing night, I awoke to the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter right beside my bed. I bolted upright, my heart racing, and saw a small figure standing in the corner of my room, shrouded in shadows. It was barely more than a silhouette, but I could feel its gaze piercing through the darkness. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. I blinked, and in that brief moment of uncertainty, the figure vanished, leaving only a chilling silence in its wake. I was terrified. There was no explanation, no rationalization for what I had witnessed. I couldn't stay there any longer. The very next day, I packed my things and moved out, grateful to escape the nightmare my home had become. I stayed with my friend for a while, sharing my experiences and seeking comfort in her company. Months later, as I attempted to put distance between myself and those experiences, I received a call from my landlord. He mentioned that there had been complaints from the tenants who moved into my former apartment. Strange occurrences were happening again, flooding, moving furniture, and laughter echoing through the walls. My heart sank. I soon learned that my apartment had a history. A family had once lived there, a mother and her young daughter. The mother had vanished under mysterious circumstances, while the daughter was found alone, wandering the streets nearby days later, never the same again. The building had become known for its tragic past, haunted by the echoes of lives once lived there. The realization was almost unbearable. I hadn't just fled from a place. I left behind something tormented, and unrest lingering like smoke in the air. I often wonder about that young girl, eternally lost in the shadows of that apartment, forever reaching for a world that no longer recognized her existence. Though I'm now miles away, I still hear echoes of laughter in my dreams, and I can never quite shake the feeling that there are things in this world beyond our understanding, waiting just on the edge of our perception, whispering secrets that may never be revealed. Sometimes late at night, I find myself tossing and turning, half listening for the giggles that once filled my darkened hallways, half hoping they'd never find me again. It was a sultry summer evening when I found myself in the quaint town of Millfield, a place where shadows loomed larger than life and secrets were buried deep beneath the surface. Having moved there to escape the cacophony of city life, I envisioned a serene existence, one complete with friendly neighbors and peaceful nights. Little did I know that I was stepping into a living nightmare. My new home was a charming, albeit older, Victorian-style house that had seen better days. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt an indescribable chill creep up my spine. It wasn't just the draft from the slightly ajar window or the creaking floorboards beneath my feet. It was something more, a heavy presence that settled over me like a shroud. Ignoring the uneasiness gnawing at me, I unpacked my belongings, trying to convince myself that the unfamiliarity of the place was the source of my discomfort. As days turned into weeks, I began exploring the town and soon discovered that Millfield held a dark history. Conversations with my new neighbors revealed whispered tales of missing persons from decades past, unusual occurrences, and an ancient legend surrounding my home. It was said that the house was built upon cursed ground, a site where unspeakable rituals had once taken place, drawing the interest of darker forces. Most dismissed these stories as mere folklore, but I felt the weight of those words press down on me, particularly at night when the shadows danced just outside my window. After a few weeks, strange events began to unfold. It started with minor disturbances. A cupboard would be ajar when I knew I'd closed it. Shadows flitted across the edges of my vision, and an inexplicable sensation of being watched trailed me relentlessly throughout the house. My nights were tormented by unsettling dreams, each one more vivid and chilling than the last. The dreams often involved a woman, pale, with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression. I would wake in a cold sweat, my heart racing, unsure if it was a remnant of sleep or a prescient warning. One evening, compelled by an overwhelming curiosity and perhaps a foolish sense of bravado, I decided to delve deeper into the history of my home. The local library was an old, dusty building filled with the scent of aged paper and forgotten stories. I discovered archives detailing the original owners of the house, a family that vanished without a trace over 100 years ago. The town's records detailed odd rituals and whispers of ghosts tied to the land, but I was particularly drawn to tales of a woman named Eliza. Hints from dusty tomes suggested she had been involved in the dark practices that marred the town's past, and her soul was forever linked to my home. The further I dug, the more it felt like I was uncovering the layers of a nightmare that was never fully buried. One fateful night, the storm clouds gathered ominously over Millfield. The winds howled, whipping around the house as if trying to warn me. I settled in with a candle, determined to confront the history of my residence. As the storm raged outside, I felt a sudden stillness envelop the room. The hairs on the back of my neck stood erect as an icy draft crept in from nowhere. The shadows grew thick, twisting and stretching unnaturally across the walls, and the temperature dropped so significantly that my breath fogged in the air. Suddenly, I heard a whisper, fragile yet clear, a voice floating through the heavy silence. "Help me." It was a plea full of despair, and against my better judgment, I found myself compelled to respond, though no words left my lips. I felt the floor beneath me tremble as an unseen force began to pull me toward the basement door. Compelled yet reluctant, I found my hand pushing the door open, revealing a staircase spiraling into darkness. With a heart full of dread, I descended into the depths of the house. The moment my foot touched the last step, a surge of cold air enveloped me, and the door slammed shut above, sealing me in darkness. My pulse raced as I fumbled my way through the inky black, reaching for anything solid. It was then that I felt it, a soft, cold hand grasping mine, leading me deeper into the abyss. I was paralyzed with fear, my instincts pleading for escape, yet I felt strangely comforted by the touch. "Please," the voice emanated again, more urgent this time. "Help me find peace." My heart thundered as realization dawned on me. This was Eliza, trapped, her spirit lingering in anguish. The air thickened as I stumbled through the dank corridor, the walls whispering secrets of a forgotten past. An overwhelming urge to help consumed me, far more powerful than my fear. The further I went, the more I began to see flickers of her life, a confirmation of the woman whose soul was entwined with this place. I spotted a faint light ahead and quickened my pace, and it was a sultry summer evening when I found myself in the quaint town of Millfield, a place where shadows loomed larger than life and secrets were buried deep beneath the surface. Having moved there to escape the cacophony of city life, I envisioned a serene existence, one complete with friendly neighbors and peaceful nights. Little did I know that I was stepping into a living nightmare. My new home was a charming, albeit older, Victorian-style house that had seen better days. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt an indescribable chill creep up my spine. It wasn't just the draft from the slightly ajar window or the creaking floorboards beneath my feet. It was something more, a heavy presence that settled over me like a shroud. Ignoring the uneasiness gnawing at me, I unpacked my belongings, trying to convince myself that the unfamiliarity of the place was the source of my discomfort. As days turned into weeks, I began exploring the town and soon discovered that Millfield held a dark history. Conversations with my new neighbors revealed whispered tales of missing persons from decades past, unusual occurrences, and an ancient legend surrounding my home. It was said that the house was built upon cursed ground, a site where unspeakable rituals had once taken place, drawing the interest of darker forces. Most dismissed these stories as mere folklore, but I felt the weight of those words press down on me, particularly at night when the shadows danced just outside my window. After a few weeks, strange events began to unfold. It started with minor disturbances. A cupboard would be ajar when I knew I'd closed it. Shadows flitted across the edges of my vision, and an inexplicable sensation of being watched trailed me relentlessly throughout the house. My nights were tormented by unsettling dreams, each one more vivid and chilling than the last. The dreams often involved in the hushed whispers of a small town, where the shadows stretched longer as the sun began to dip behind the hills. I found myself drawn to a dilapidated house at the end of a forgotten road. Set against the backdrop of a dense, encroaching forest, the house had stood for years, twisted vines snaking up its sides and windows clouded with the residue of time. The rumors surrounding it were as thick as the mist that rolled in each evening, stories of a family that vanished without a trace, leaving behind only echoes of laughter that morphed into cries for help. Curiosity, that unyielding predator, urged me forward, and despite the warnings etched on the faces of the townsfolk, I took the plunge, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a growing sense of dread. As I stepped onto the porch, the wood creaked underfoot, a cacophony that seemed to awaken the very spirits trapped within the rotting walls. I felt a chill race down my spine when I noticed a children's swing in the overgrown yard, swaying gently as if propelled by unseen hands, sending a shiver coursing through my veins. I hesitated, but the door creaked open as if welcoming me into its dark embrace. Inside, the air was thicker, suffused with the stale scent of decay and something else, something sweet yet suffocating. I flicked on my flashlight, illuminating fragments of a tortured past, dusty portraits hanging askew on the wall, cracked mirrors reflecting distorted versions of my fear-stricken face, and remnants of a life once vibrant, now reduced to decay. I could feel the weight of countless eyes probing my every move, as though the very walls were alive with watching spirits. As I ventured deeper, the sounds of the outside world faded into an apprehensive silence, broken only by the soft patter of my footsteps. An overwhelming sense of being watched gripped me tighter with every creaking floorboard. I stumbled upon a child's room, a pink canopy bed draped in layers of dust, stuffed animals huddled together in the corner, their button eyes glistening in the beam of my flashlight. A chill wrapped around my heart when I heard a faint giggle, soft yet unmistakable. I froze, heart pounding, as the sound drifted towards me, wrapping me in a cold embrace of dread. Was it my imagination? Or had the house truly held on to whispers of a forgotten childhood? The laughter echoed again, this time closer, and a sense of urgency stirred within me. I turned to flee, but as I did, the door slammed shut with a force that rattled my very bones. Panic surged through my veins, and I grasped the doorknob, pulling with all my strength, but it remained resolute, laughing in its silent, taunting manner. My heart raced, pounding in my chest like a war drum as I felt an icy breath on the back of my neck, sending shards of ice dancing across my skin. I turned slowly, the flashlight beam flickering in the dim light, illuminating nothing but the shadows that seemed to converge upon me. I stumbled backward, my breath quickening as I found myself before a large mirror, its once reflective surface now shrouded in grime. I wiped away the film with trembling fingers, the reflection revealing not just my own terrified face, but something lurking behind me, a fleeting shadow that danced at the edges of the glass. It was gone before I could comprehend, leaving my heart thudding violently against my ribcage. A sudden slamming sound echoed from downstairs, breaking the silence like glass shattering in a still room, and a primal instinct urged me to flee. But just as I turned, a soft voice called out for me, sweet and innocent, "Help me, please." The plea was laced with an urgency that pierced the terrifying shroud of the moment. Torn between the instinct to escape and the captivating call of the unseen child, I stood frozen, indecision clawing at my throat. I had to know, had to understand what lay beneath the darkness that enveloped this house. Gathering every ounce of courage, I ventured into the hallway, propelled by the voice that seemed to resonate through the very walls. The corridor twisted and turned, and I felt as if the house itself was morphing around me. I pushed through the doorway to the basement, where the darkness deepened, a suffocating weight that pressed against my chest. The air turned cold, and the frigid tendrils of fear wrapped around my heart. As I descended the creaking staircase, the voice grew louder, a child's giggle echoed, sending tremors through my resolve. I reached the bottom and swung my flashlight around, revealing a small, dimly lit room with remnants of toys scattered about, covered in dust yet untouched by time. In the far corner, I saw a figure, a little girl with pale skin and dark hair, her eyes wide and reflecting the flashlight's beam. "I'm so glad you found me," she whispered, a smile breaking across her face that chilled my blood. "I've been waiting for someone to play." Her voice held an innocence that belied the darkness surrounding us, but something deeper told me I was not witnessing a desire for companionship but a lure, an invitation into her world of despair. I took a hesitant step back, the flood of instinct screaming at me to run, but the girl extended her hand, clutching an old, ragged doll. "Please, they don't let me leave," she said, her voice laced with a heartbreak that stung my soul. My mind raced as I contemplated the stories I had heard, the warning of those who vanished too. What happened to you? I found myself asking, though every fiber of my being told me to flee. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted, the chill deepening as shadows coalesced around her. "You can help me break the curse," she said, her voice darkening, losing the innocence that drew me. "Help me find them, and you can stay with me forever." Terror seized me, vivid images of the missing family flooding my mind. I stumbled back, the weight of her gaze feeling like chains binding me in place. "No, I can't. I have to go," I gasped, turning sharply, feeling the cold fingers of darkness grasping at my heels as I raced back towards the stairs, her laughter morphing into a cacophony of shrieks echoing behind me like a haunting melody of sorrow. The door at the top of the staircase remained shut, but desperation surged within me, and with all my strength, I pushed it open, tumbling into the hallway. I dashed for the front door, flames of fear igniting my every step. The house seemed to groan and shift around me, eagerly trying to reclaim me as its own. I threw myself against the door, feeling it yield this time, my heart pounding as I burst into the open air, gasping for breath, the sunlight blindingly bright as I stumbled onto the lawn. I ran, heedless of the branches that clawed at my skin, not daring to glance back until I reached the safety of the road. I didn't stop running until I was far from that forsaken house, the laughter of the little girl piercing through the veil of tranquility, echoing in my mind like a lingering nightmare. To this day, I refuse to return, though sometimes in the dead of night, when the world is silent and the shadows grow restless, I hear her voice, sweet yet beckoning, "Help me, please." It haunts me, that empty, decaying house, alive with echoes of laughter and screams lost in time, and I wonder how many others have answered that call, how many have played when the sun dipped low, never to be seen again. It was late on a rainy autumn evening when I decided to take a shortcut through the old, dense woods that bordered our small town. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and shadows grew long and eerie, wrapping the trees in an unsettling embrace. I was a teenager, still naive and enchanted by the thrill of the unknown, so I ventured into the woods, convinced that nothing could happen to me. My footsteps crunched on the fallen leaves, each sound echoing through the stillness like a warning bell. The deeper I went, the more enveloped I became in darkness. The canopy overhead thickened, blocking out what little light remained. It was quiet, too quiet. I could hear the rustle of critters nearby, but it felt as if even the birds had decided to keep their distance from whatever lurked in the shadows. I pulled out my phone, no service, of course, and slipped it back into my pocket. Just ahead, I noticed an old, decrepit cabin. It looked abandoned, its windows shattered and its door hanging off its hinges. Curiosity piqued, I approached, the weatherwood creaking beneath my weight. As I stepped inside, a chill enveloped me, seeping into my bones. Dust particles danced in the air, illuminated by the single beam of light filtering through a broken window. The place felt alive, as though it had stories to tell and secrets to share. I explored further, the remnants of old furniture casting shadows against the walls, half-hearted whispers of lives once lived in that eerie space. A persistent feeling of being watched crept over me, but I brushed it aside, attributing it to my imagination. Then I heard it, a soft, almost inaudible whisper echoing from the back room. Slowly, dread pooled in my stomach as I moved toward the sound, each footstep heavier than the last. The door to the back room was ajar, and as I nudged it open, a wave of stale air hit me, mingled with the scent of rot. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered. It was then I noticed something strange. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The air grew colder, and I could feel an unseen presence coiling around me. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but a deep-rooted curiosity kept me rooted in place. As I examined the symbols closer, I felt a sharp prick on my neck, like a pin had just been jabbed into my skin. I recoiled, my heart racing, and the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a tempest. "Leave, while you can," they seemed to warn. Panic surged, and I tore myself away from the wall, only to find that the door I had entered through was now gone, replaced by an unyielding wall. The air thickened with desperation, and I stumbled backward, my mind racing. This isn't happening, I told myself, but deep down, I knew I was far from safe. I turned to escape through a window, but found it sealed tight, as if the cabin itself were conspiring against me. The whispers morphed into cries, pained, anguished sounds that pierced through the suffocating darkness. I pressed my palms against the walls, searching for a way out, but the symbols began to glow, casting an unsettling light around me. My breaths quickened as images flashed before my eyes. Incomplete stories of those who had once walked these floors, who had succumbed to the power that thrummed in the air. It was a trap, a sinister lure for the curious and the brave. Panic turned to resolve as I fought back the urge to break down. I recalled a story I had heard about this cabin, a tale of a cult that had once lived in this unforgiving place, performing rituals that beckoned dark forces from beyond. This was their sanctuary, their realm, and I was trespassing. In an act of desperation, I called out to whatever lurked in the shadows. "I'm not afraid," I shouted. "I have no power here." The whispers faltered, and in that brief silence, I heard something shuffling in the darkness, something shifting behind me. I turned, breathing heavily, desperate for any sign of life or a way to escape. An outline emerged, a figure cloaked in shadows, its face obscured. It took a step forward, and a rush of fear surged through me. "You shouldn't have come here," it rasped, its voice a haunting echo that reverberated through my very being. "You were too late." Instinct took over, and I dove for the window frame, slamming my shoulder against it with all my strength. To my shock, the glass shattered, and I tumbled through. I landed hard on the damp earth outside, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I scrambled to my feet, not daring to look back. I sprinted through the woods, the whispers trailing behind like demonic shadows, urging me to return. Each step I'd extend a jolt of pain through my legs, but I didn't stop, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. As I emerged from the trees and reached the safety of the streetlights, I dared a glance over my shoulder. The woods stood still, the cabin looming like a dark memory in the distance. I ran home, collapsing into bed, each thud of my heart a reminder of my narrow escape. That night, sleep eluded me, and I felt eyes upon me, watching from the corners of my room. Days passed, and I tried to forget the cabin, the voices, the figure that had haunted my dreams. But the whispers never left. They crept into my thoughts during quiet moments, warning me, taunting me, a reminder that the darkness was always there, waiting for my return. I became a shadow of my former self, plagued by anxiety and fear, my once carefree spirit crushed beneath the weight of the unknown. Every rustle of leaves outside sent chills down my spine. Every flicker of the lights became a reminder of that night. I sought solace in friends and laughter, trying to distract myself from the ever-looming darkness. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had walked into a world I could never understand, a realm of shadows and secrets that had left its mark upon me. And as the nights grew longer and the air grew colder, the whispers persisted, unyielding, a constant reminder that some doors should never be opened, that some places are better left undisturbed. The woods called to me, a siren song that I fought to ignore, but the pull grew stronger with each passing day. And one fateful night, as curiosity gnawed at the edges of my mind, I found myself at the edge of the woods once more, standing beneath the ghostly glow of the moon. The trees loomed over me like ancient sentinels, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, watching, beckoning.